Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Today is a very fine, wintry, chilly Tuesday afternoon. And by the time that this reaches your eyes and ears, it's probably going to be very much the same, only Wednesday or Thursday. And who even knows if it's going to be wintry where you are. But for me, it's a snow day, a nice relaxing snow day, to get a little bit of a nice relaxing project out of the way. Today, we're going to be continuing on a little bit of a venture of ours, where we're going to be going generation by generation for the Monster Hunter games, looking at the monsters introduced therein, and slapping them on a tier list. So, in the previous version of this, which was the 5th generation monsters, I got asked a couple of times, where is a certain monster that was introduced in, say, like the 3rd one? You know, like, where's Baroth? Where's Mizu? Where's Rathalos? Wouldn't it make sense to have, say, Fatalis on this version of the list, because he was changed so drastically in World and Iceborne? And to that, I think it is less redundant and just a little bit more easy organization-wise to just go by generation where things were introduced and then talk about the versions of them across the timeline. Namely, my favorite ones, as those are the ones I focus on the most, where I think that the monsters are at their highest potential currently, and that's more or less going to be how they're going to be built upon later on. There's a couple of monsters where I think that the newer incarnations are a little bit worse, but I think maybe 9 times out of 10 they've only really gotten better with age. So, those are usually the more important ones, as they're usually the newer ones, and thus that means that they're usually the template on which they're going to be built upon if they're introduced in, say, Wilds or Wilds Ultimates or whatever Portable 6 and Portable 6 Ultimate's gonna be, right? So, best only to kind of look at these guys once and talk about how good they are now or how good they are at their best, and if weaker incarnations, or my least favorite incarnations, I think are kind of pertinent to the discussion, they might come up as well, maybe knocking things down 1 point or 2 here and there. But mostly, I'm just looking at how good these monsters have been, not necessarily how good they are in the generation that they're introduced. So, let's take a look at our tiers here. So, tippity top of the order, we have the absolute classics. These are the guys who have stood the test of time for about 20 years now. Either they were improved upon so heavily over flawed versions of them in the past that they have topped the charts, or they were always good concepts that were just built upon and experimented with and elevated and brought up into more modern sensibilities of Monster Hunter and allowed to shine even more. All reliable are the monsters that they're not the absolute cream of the crop, but you bring them in and they're usually very good fights, even despite their age. They are the fights that are typically pretty fun, have some interesting gimmicks, have some cool experimentation for how early they were introduced. The monsters that are really good roster stuffers. Really good friendly faces that can add a little bit more extra meat and potatoes onto a roster. Perfectly fine are the monsters that have about as many issues as they have pros to them. The monsters that you can kinda take or leave, you're happy to see them or happy to have them kind of built upon in the future, or you see some potential in, but as they stand right now, they really aren't the best. Pretty flawed are the monsters who certainly aren't god-awful by any means, but have a lot of problems that have really been yet to be fixed. They're due for some overhauls, they kind of just haven't been given the treatment they needed, but there's something there. And leave them in the past are the monsters that no one will weep if they're never seen again. The concepts that just aren't really ever gonna be fully fleshed out, there's not really that much to go off of. They have so many problems, they just don't quite work. Thankfully, I don't even think we're really gonna have all that many on the leave them in the past. I think there's a lot of potential in even the least best executed monsters out there. But we're going to take a look, and I'll think as I go, right? So, we're going to be going category by category, starting with the birds into the flying wyverns, then into the Piscean wyverns and the elder dragons. Kind of cool to look at this roster, right? Just kind of assessing it before we go in, how much they were able to get out of the wyvern skeleton. There's very little deviation off of it, save for the raptors, which was just one model, and then the 3 unique elders. You really just kind of have the stock wyvern skeleton used over and over again, and they were able to pull a ton, at least I think, of different inspirations and different animals and different abilities and different gimmicks out of your stock standard wyvern skeleton for the obviously very limited resources and limited, I wouldn't even, maybe limited vision, but limited ability to really kind of understand what this franchise was and built upon it, that these old games had. There's a fair bit of substance built out of the limitations here, and I'm going to be pretty interested in talking about these guys. For starters, right off the bat, we're going to be talking about the 3 raptors. So the runner wyverns, the front half of the bird wyverns, and we're going to start off with 3 of the old school, old world wyverns. Now, we don't have Giapre or Giapre yet, as they are actually a second generation version, though I believe white Velocipre was technically considered a subspecies for a little while, but the Giapre, as we know it properly, get introduced in the second generation, so we'll be talking about them in the next video in this series. But for right now, we have Velocidrome, Gendrome, and Iodrome. So Velocidrome, right off the bat, is the template for a whole ton of monsters. Even with our most recent game in Rise with Great Azuchi, Velocidrome has been the template for about 20 years, especially for like starter boss monsters, with the only real deviation being a little bit in 4th generation, with Celtis kind of being an opening boss alongside Great Jaggy and the other raptors, and the 5th, and World, really, with Jagras and his relatives taking over as these big reptilian fanged wyverns. So there's a good amount of pedigree, really, to Velocidrome. But is he nothing but pedigree, I think, is the question. And there's some credence to that, right? There's just not too much to him. I think his design is pretty striking. I think for a generic Velociraptor boss, I think Velocidrome is pretty easy to pick out. I think the design is, for how simple it is, for how rudimentary it is, there's something about Monster Hunter monster design where you can just kind of pick them out. It's like, yeah, generic blue raptor, right? That's kind of whatever, but it's kind of like the sparkling, gleaming azure blue with like the black tiger stripe going down the back, the big red crest, the more bird-like beak filled with snaggle teeth, and the very large protruding red claws that he has on his hands and on his feet. Like, there's just enough extra details to him that you see him and you immediately recognize him. He's not just a raptor boss in any old fantasy video game. So I do like the design. I do like how he looks. I do think that the Monster Hunter franchise as a whole deserves a bit of applause for just being able to make raptor enemy so memorable. You know, raptor being, if you have a game with dinosaurs or dinosaur type monsters, you know, he's your fodder guy, and the raptors have always kind of been your fodder guys. But you still know who Velocidrome is. You know who the Velocipre are. It was really cool to see the Velocipre make their way into Rise, even if Drome didn't. It's nice to have them around, right? Even if the moveset is really shallow, even if I think the dog wyvern half of the whole group, so that being Jaggy and his relatives, are very much the superior group over the old bird wyverns and even the new bird wyverns. There's enough done right. I think There's enough done right in the design, in the sound design, and I think just where they kind of exist in their environment, you know, teeming all over the forest and hills and in the jungle regions and stuff like that. And, you know, Velociprey and Velocidrome also get a couple of neat roles in a number of, like, ecology cutscenes, showing the hunting habits of other animals. Like, they're a pretty interesting and necessary part of certain food chains. Like I said, it's nice to have them around. Perfectly fine. And I think as we're going to go, he's going to be towards the back half of perfectly fine. But there's not really much in terms of flaws, because there's not really a ton of depth, right? He has claw swipes. He's got a admittedly kind of cool pin attack in the 4th generation games. He's got some bites at you, some leaps. Very, very simple. Like, it's as simple as it can get. I wouldn't mind if Velocidrome got, like, a new move or two if he were ever to come back. I'd be happy with it, right? I'd be kind of fine with it. He's perfectly fine. There's no real issues, because he doesn't really go into pretty flawed, because there's not a lot of depth there to have a lot of flaws, in my opinion at least. So I think he'll probably be down here by the time we're done with things. Gendrome. I'd be willing to bet a lot of people don't like Gendrome. I think in terms of a fight, Gendrome might be my least favorite of the 4. Actually, though, in terms of design, I think he's my top of the 4, actually. With his dual crest and his kind of, like, goofy-looking, very, very teeny little paralysis fangs. And I really like his desert camo with the light kind of dusty greens and yellows and browns and tans and whatnot going on with his color palette. I think just kind of like the variety of colors is really cool. I like the big red beady raptor eye he's got. I actually really like how Gendrome looks. He's obnoxious though, because it is very easy for him to paralyze you, and it's very easy for the Gen Prey to paralyze you, right? I almost feel like the Gen Prey do a little bit of extra damage to his reputation, because it can be very easy for those little snots to paralyze you when you're fighting something else. And paralysis, I think, is generally the most obnoxious of the status ailments. And it's kind of, especially with monsters this nimble and this quick, even though they don't hit you very hard, it really kind of is just a free hit. It's just kind of agitating, right? But I still really do like how he looks. And he kind of cool little bit in a Monoblos cutscene. I don't know, I kind of feel like he's like exactly in the same place. Because like, Velocidrome is less infuriating. But I think that Gendrome just like looks much better. Perfectly fine. You know, there's even an argument for pretty flawed, right? Because even though I like how he looks, I can't deny that it's a very basic moveset built with a very obnoxious debuff in mind. Do I think he's perfectly fine? I don't know. For like an early game paralysis monster, I also think like Gypceros is definitely a better early game paralysis monster than he is. It's one of the two. Because I think maybe a little bit more objectively he might go down here. Just because, like, fighting Gendrome and a pack of Gen Prey is obnoxious. Like, you're gonna get paralyzed. It stinks, right? And against Gendrome, I'm usually not... Against something like this low level, I'm usually not running counter builds. I mean, Paralysis Negate is easy enough to get in there, but I don't know. It's just... I like looking at him. I like having him around. I don't like fighting him. I might have him here, but I reserve the right to move him up later. I think this, objectively, he might be more fitting here. Just because, I don't know. Maybe if you gave him a couple more attacks and made the paralysis maybe a little less infrequent, we could be talking a little bit higher up there, because I really don't hate him. Then we have Iodrome, who is still, to this day, the big boss of the old world bird wyverns. What do I think about Iodrome? Iodrome's a neat one, right? Because with Velocidrome and Gypceros and Gendrome, very scaly, dinosaur-y, raptor-y, very kind of, especially with Veloci and Gia, there, or Gia, I don't know which one. I'll probably wind up saying both. Very, very samey. And then Gendrome kind of is like a little bit of an outlier on the two because he's not just a full copy of the body one for one with a color change, but texture wise very similar. And then you have this like more newt salamander, kind of moist cavern swamp dwelling looking one. I do like that he's a deviation from the rest of them, right? I do like that they took the concept and then just shifted it quite a bit. Just re-up the textures, changed them around in according to where he lives, right? He lives in a different environment, lives in these very, very high temperature, but also kind of, especially in swamplands, very kind of wet environments. With that taken into consideration, I have no idea what the hell he's doing in volcanoes. He'd probably dry out and die immediately. So that doesn't make a ton of sense. But in terms of like a marshlands dweller, I think it's kind of cool to take a Velociraptor and put a little bit of salamander in there, and have him be a toxic monster and a toxic monster. he's a lot like the Ios are a lot like the Gens in the fact that they are little status inflicting little turds. But poison I find to be just generally much less offensive than paralysis. You can kind of just shrug it off unless you're getting beat up. Then it's really not all that much of a thing that you want to be worried about. The one thing that always annoys me about Iodrome, and I'm curious if other people feel this way, but does anyone else feel like Iodrome just has a ton of health for how early game he is? For just being like kind of one of the default raptor bosses is? I mean, maybe I'm just bringing the wrong elements by accident, or I'm just not doing well or whatever, but I feel like in comparison to his brothers, Iodrome just stays up forever. And when you have him jumping around and hopping around and having this narrow-ass hurt box, he can be kind of obnoxious. He's definitely not one I love to go fighting, because I feel like I'm just, like, punching this lizard for, like, 10, 11, 12 minutes. And he just doesn't go down. So Iodrome's got some cool stuff. I don't love fighting him, right? I don't love fighting him. It takes a little bit. It feels like it takes longer than it should in comparison with the rest of his cousins. But I think design-wise, he's pretty cool. I think evolution on a concept-wise, pretty cool. Again, he has his poison, but like physically, he's really not all that different from the rest of his cousins. I think I'll put him like right here, just right behind Velocidrome. Okay, so when it comes to the original Monster Hunter, Yian Kut Ku, as far as I'm aware, I have yet to play it, though I do actually have a ROM of it currently, is really kind of your first trial. Yian Kut Ku's kind of got a special place in the franchise for that. He's really your first real boss, your first real fight, your first real taste of Monster Hunter. He's shooting out fireballs and he's flying around and you gotta track him with paintballs and you can stun him with sonic bombs. And he hurts more, he's more challenging, he's faster, he's bigger than the raptors that you fought before him. Yian Kut Ku's kind of special. He's kind of special for the franchise, right? I think, how much of it do you want to look at as, or how much credence does like legacy give you? Does he actually kind of stand the test of time? And I think he kind of does, right? He's a bit of a model for how a lot of bird wyverns, your winged bird wyverns work. Bit of a model for how a lot of the early flying wyverns worked. And with his most recent incarnations in Generations and 4 Ultimates, I don't think Yian Kut Ku's bad. I do think he could stand to maybe grow up a little bit. And what I mean by that is a lot of the monsters he inspired, a lot of the monsters who used to use his old moves, a lot of the first and the second generation bird and flying wyverns use a lot of his moves, use a lot of his tactics. I feel like a lot of them have grown out of that, have developed their own thing, have kind of moved on from, you know, like the single shot projectile and the flaily run and the running all over Kingdom Come from one side of the map to the other. A lot of them have kind of improved from that. And though Yian Kut Ku, I think, is a little bit better designed now, or in 4th gen, than he was in, say, 1st and 2nd, I think there's room for him to learn some new tricks. I think he still very much feels like the template, and there's room for him to evolve beyond being the template. Not that I think his old moves should be thrown out. I think they're all very baked into his personality, but I'd be interested to see Yian Kut Ku learn some new things. I talked about it a little bit in the 5th generation video, but looking at like Aknasom, right? I feel like Aknasom almost could kind of replace Yian Kut Ku in some terms, not in every term. As it is, they are both early game bird wyverns, both pretty simple. They both don't have straight shot projectiles, but they have arcing fireballs. But, you know, you have Aknasom. Aknasom is very graceful, has a lot of physical moves, features kind of like dance into its techniques. Whereas, you know, you have Yian Kut Ku, which is kind of this big, staggering, derpy flail chicken, right? And I feel like just Aknasom really kind of has a little bit more personality to it, has a lot of very, very eye-catching animations. Yian Kut Ku, he just feels a little old. He feels a little old to me. And I'd want him to retain some of that kind of age to him. But I think if he comes back, and he should come back, I think he deserves to have a little bit more. Right? And even at that, you know, you want to talk about Yian Kut Ku. There's a lot to him, honestly. Monster Hunter, 1st generation Monster Hunter monsters were built with a lot of usage of items in mind, usage of defensive skills in mind, strategies around certain monster gimmicks in mind that have kind of become pretty secondary as we've gone on. Kut Ku's got quite a bit to him, right? So him being a flying monster, you can flash pot him, though that's not as effective as, say, against like Rathian or Rathalos. Since he has like those really big ears, if you can stun him with loud noises off of the Sonic Bomb. As you get to later games, you can find him snapping up conchus, digging them up out of the ground, and converting them basically into fireballs that he flings at you. He has got some cool stuff. I really like him in terms of his personality. He's kind of just like this aggressive tantrum doofus goober bird, right? I do like him. I think it is time for him to become a little bit more than the default winged bird wyvern. So much has been built off of him, and I would love it if he built a little bit more for himself. So I'm gonna put him right up here. Probably gonna be pretty close to the top of perfectly fine, because I do like him. This brings us to the blue Yian Kut Ku. So, 1st generation is where subspecies began. They began in Monster Hunter G, which is the 3rd and last of the 1st generation games. And subspecies and variants and all that stuff was always a really cool idea, right? Having certain factors during birth, certain mutations, or certain natural occurrences, or unnatural occurrences, certain criteria, be the reason for why monsters have different shells, different coloration, different personality, different abilities, different elements, and whatnot. A really, really cool idea, and we're going to talk about the progenitor of that idea a little bit later down the road. But the first instance we have of that is the blue Kut Ku. Now, for a good long while, that being for the 1st generation, 2nd generation, and, you know, by proxy the 3rd generation, just because they weren't there, a lot of these 1st generation subspecies really didn't have a whole lot of place, right? They were worth tracking down just for different armor sets, really. If their armor sets had like a really good set of skills on them, that's why you'd want to pursue them. They'd have different weapons. It was more stuff to make, really. But a lot of these monsters could be kind of considered as roster bloat. honestly. And I think, thankfully, we're in a day and age where subspecies and variants are almost not roster bloat whatsoever, right? I think we're in a pretty good day and age. But for a good long while, a lot of these guys were just kind of tougher, faster, stronger, different coloration, different armor skills. That was kind of it. Maybe you'd get them on a slightly different map. Luckily, for a lot of these guys, 4 Ultimate rolled around. And 4 Ultimate took a lot, almost all, of these first generation subspecies, gave them a new home, gave them some new moves, tuned them up a little bit, tweaked them around, gave them some new personality. So 4 Ultimates kind of a saving grace for a lot of these guys that otherwise would have just been palette swaps for a good long while, which is pretty cool. And I did a little bit of research before doing this video of watching them to see kind of what changes are there, what new stuff is there, and some of these monsters have some cool stuff. Blue Yian Kut Ku kind of really wasn't one of those. Even still to this day, in his most recent version in 4 Ultimates, Blue Yian Kut Ku is still kind of tougher, faster, stronger Kut Ku with maybe like a new move. Maybe he combos into some moves a little bit faster than the original Kut Ku does. He can get to the point where he's so fast that it's kind of oppressive, honestly. I was watching him, when he was enraged, his attack speed is incredibly quick. But I don't know. I do like how he looks, right? The blue is nice. I think I might prefer how the original one looks by like a slight margin, but I do think that the blue looks kind of nice. One fun fact about him is that with the hardcore monsters in Frontier, and this is kind of like one of the cooler facts about this guy, is you had the hardcore monsters in Frontier, which took a monster and kind of like frontierified them a little bit more than they already were, just to kind of make them on par with some of the unique creations that Frontier had. And the hardcore version of Blue Yian Kut Ku was added so late in the game that he's actually kind of insane in terms of his damage, in terms of his moveset. By modern standards, it's not the flashiest stuff in the world. I was watching the fight before I did this video, but it is some kind of cool stuff. And honestly, if we got a 6th generation Blue Kut Ku, I think it'd be kind of sick if we got some of his hardcore Frontier moves. I like the green streak in the ears. That's kind of cool. How there's like a little bit of color of differentiation and like where the color is. But yeah, no, as he stands right now currently, I think he's still one of those subspecies that kind of struggles a little bit. He's not one for one the same. He has like a new thing here or there, but it's not much, right? It's not much. There's still Blue Kut Ku is still one who I don't think has really earned his keep quite as much. So that's the question. Does he go behind? I'd say for like a subspecies, especially considering looking at, and a little bit of a spoilers for later, kind of like how good some of the wraths got, how much stuff like Khezu and Gravios got, and how much stuff like Black Diablos gets. The fact that there are other subspecies in this group that have gotten like really good updates, and Blue Kut Ku's update is pretty minimal by comparison, I think that's going to jock him a little bit, honestly. So I'm going to say pretty flawed, mostly by proxy of a lot of these other guys down here who went from recolors to their own thing got much better facelifts than he did. I think Blue Kut Ku is still probably waiting for his proper time to shine. So, where do we want to put this guy? Definitely a little less agitating than Gendrome, right? Again, I really like Gendrome's design really kind of carries him for me over really kind of anything. So, do I put Blue Kut Ku below him or above him? Probably above, right? Yeah, I'm fine with that. Okay. Yian Garuga. Your boy is a Yian Garuga fan. And I'm going to be honest, I kinda always have been. Ever since Freedom Unites, when I fought him for the first time, I've always kinda liked him. I know not a lot of people, well, I don't even know if not a lot of people, I know he's got his detractors, right? Garuga's got some people who do not like him. I do. I kinda always have. I like his design. I like his sound design. I kind of like his hybridization of a couple of monsters, what we'll talk about in a sec. I like kind of his odd role in the world as being this kind of messed up, battle-driven, always kind of found tattered and mutilated bird that's out in the world, which I think is kind of a pretty cool place in Monster Hunter's canon to be. I think he's got a cool moveset. I think he's got like a really neat combination of how he uses his abilities together. It's like I like Yian Garuga like a lot. And he really they when they brought him over into World and Iceborne, I still think they kept him properly aggressive and properly tough and mean and nice and fast and brutal. But I do think they toned down some of the stuff about him that was admittedly a little obnoxious. Like his quick shotgun roars into these like 0 to 100 insta charges. Admittedly, as someone who does kind of like Garuga, there was stuff about him that was purposefully obnoxious design in terms of his combat design that I think were toned down just the perfect amount. I very much enjoy his incarnation in World and Iceborne. What's also interesting about this guy, and maybe someone who's a little bit more versed on Monster Hunter than I am, is Yian Garuga's kind of weird in that he's kind of like the flagship that never was, right? If you think about it. I almost kind of feel like he was supposed to be the flagship of Monster Hunter Portable or Monster Hunter Freedom. So if you look, if I'm not mistaken, number 1, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think he is legitimately the only new monster added in Monster Hunter Freedom or Portable. If you check the wiki now, they'll be calling him Scarred Garuga, because I think he used to only ever have the scar when his first incarnations were around. But I think he's the only monster that was brand new to Portable. In addition, he's got his own fight theme, which a lot of the generics, non-flagships, non-elders don't have. And in World Iceborne, a game that was all about, or in Iceborne specifically, an expansion that was all about bringing back flagships, they just brought Garuga back in. And there was a lot of people, some of my friends included, were like, you're bringing back like Tigrex and Bracky and Glavenus and Narga and all that. Why Garuga out of everybody? And I'm kind of under the assumption that for some reason, he kind of might have been the flagship for that game and it just wasn't for some reason. Because there's a lot of trappings of him being a flagship. Bigger, badder version of a pretty well-established monster. Hybridize the abilities of Kut Ku with Rathian being the poster girl of the franchise. Has his own theme, shows up in Iceborne, sole new monster in Freedom. He's a weird one to me in terms of like an exterior to the games type of sense. I feel like he should be, there's indicators that he should be more important than he actually is. It's weird to me. But yeah, no, there's very little I don't like about him. I think even like the whole hybrid thing, like there used to be a joke going around that like Yian Kut Ku shacked up with a Rathian and made Garuga. Probably not true, probably its own species. But that was kind of a cool little fan theory that went around for a little bit. It is kind of neat that he hybridizes the two's abilities, having a lot of the physical attacks of Kut Ku while having Rathian's straightforward fireballs and her backflips and everything. That whole tail that he has is laced up in poison barbs. I've always really liked how he implements his roar. He has like this quick little kind of like shotgun blast of a roar. It's shorter range, but the animation and the timing for it is very, very quick. So even though you still go through the full like cover your ears animation, he can leave his roar really, really fast. So he'll pop off his sonic bomb roar, either like get a little bit of distance, either doing kind of like retreating back and flying, or he'll just go straight into a charge, straight up into a backflip. He can combo those things really easily. Like, he's a dangerous, tenacious. He feels smart, right? He feels intelligent. The way he combos his fireballs and his charge and his roar and his tail all together. He's got a plan. I think he's one of the very first monsters that really felt like he was smart, that he was tricky, that he was cunning, that he was crafty, that he had all of these tools put together in his toolbox, and he knew how to use them in tandem. And if you watched the Rathalos video I did a little while ago, talking about why he's probably the most important fight in Rise and Sunbreak, monsters being able to kind of display intelligence through their combat style, especially when it suits the monster. I pick up on that, and I really appreciate that in combat design. It makes him obnoxious, it makes him very, very dangerous. But again, as I'll say it over and over and over again, defensive skills are in the game for the reason. Counter building is a great way to make the game more fun for yourself. And Garuga is a monster that is very much worth kind of building around, because he has a lot of very dangerous and deadly tools. And when you can work your way around those, it makes you appreciate what he can do a little bit more, because you're actively working against what he can do. And to go on my point about Yian Kut Ku a little bit earlier, and how I think he could really stand to kind of evolve and learn to do some of his own things, Garuga's kind of done that, right? So you have a monster who used to really kind of just, his whole gimmick was that he was a hybrid between the movesets of Yian Kut Ku and Rathian, right? But as we get into the later interpretations of him, you have his retreating, fly away, roar attack that he can do to kind of gain ground. You have his dive in, his face forward dive out of the midair where he slams his beak into the ground. He fires himself off as a torpedo. You get into Scarred Garuga, who has the fanning fire shot. You have his more aggressive beak stabs into the ground, where he'll lodge his beak into the ground. That's kind of what I'm talking about, right? Is he had the core gimmick of being this kind of hybrid monster, but now he feels even a little bit more like his own thing. He's kind of broken away from that. And now he has a lot of his own new moves. I think Iceborne was very, very good to him. Tweaked him in just the perfect couple of ways. Made him just the slightest little bit more annoying, keeping him dangerous, and giving him a nice little flavor of new attacks. The other cool thing about him, which I mentioned briefly, is that he's a monster who is characterized by his the battles that he's fought, the damage that he's taken, the experience he's gained from battle. Because he has, across the series, 3 variations that all have to do that. So you have Scarred Garuga, which is technically the original Garuga from the first generation games. He only ever used to come in Scarred with his eye cut out, but he was called Yian Garuga and was grandfathered in Iceborne. You have the Deadeye, which is his deviant from Generations, and you have the one-eared Garuga from Online, which we just covered in that video, with one-eared being kind of sad because he has his equilibrium gone. But for the most part, with Deadeye and with Scarred, you have a monster who is defined by his battle, defined by his experience. A Scarred or a Deadeye is probably going to be a little bit older, a little bit more battle-hardened, and have new moves and new techniques and new tactics out of that. Scarred really kind of only has the one new move, but Deadeye has his own little grab bag of tricks. I actually quite like Deadeye, but that's going to be for the 4th gen video. And I think that's kind of neat, right? That you have a monster who is very much defined by how much he gets into battle, how much he kind of gets mutilated and keeps on going and keeps on trucking, and even at the loss of very important organs, he actually only gets more dangerous and more furious. And I think there's no monster who's kind of quite like that. You have a couple of examples, the Bloses have some stuff like that, but it very much seems to be very definitive of Garuga. It's really kind of his thing. And this might be a pretty controversial opinion. I think Yian Garuga is an absolute classic. I think he really personifies a lot of what's good about Monster Hunter. The need of defensive skills to go in with gimmicks. A very unique place in the ecosystem. Really awesome array of moves. He's got a lot of really cool cutscenes, like especially the one where he's able to go blow for blow with a Devil Joe and actually knock one on its ass is awesome. Really cool looking armor, really cool looking weapon, especially his weapons. I think Garuga's got one of the neatest looking lances it ever made. I'm a fan. I'm a fan of this dude. I always have been. And I think, though he's softened just a little bit, it was in a good way. Because I think if he wasn't in Iceborne, I think we'd be looking at Old Reliable. I think Iceborne gave him just the perfect touches up. So for myself personally, Yian Garuga's is an absolute classic. I really like him. And I'm going to be interested to see people who don't share that opinion, because I know he's not the most beloved thing out there. Let's talk about Gypceros. Very, very few people's favorite. Very few people's favorite. I see the very rare Gypceros appreciation comment every once in a while, but those are endangered animals, if ever there was one. Not a lot of people like him. And the interesting question to ask is why. Because in some ways, I think Gypceros is one of the more impressive monsters to come out of the first generation. In some ways, right? Thinking about kind of how limited some of these first generation monsters were in some of their abilities, and how kind of like single gimmick they could be, for where he exists in terms of power and where he exists in terms of creation, Gypceros has a lot of stuff. And generally, I would say, honestly, monsters who can do a lot of stuff, have like a good grab bag of tools, like I was just talking about with Garuga, are generally pretty well liked. A lot of the combo element monsters, like Namiel and Garangolm, are pretty well liked. Monsters who can kind of combine their abilities together. Rachna Kadaki has a lot of like individual gimmicks that she's able to blend together and is considered probably one of the best monsters to come out of Rise, right? So why don't people like Gypceros? It's an interesting question. Because he has poison, he has the ability to steal, and he has his rubbery tail, he's got electrical resistances through his hide, and he's got his flashing, blinding crest. That's a lot for a first generation, kind of like, just kind of cresting up out of low tier, but he's probably still, especially kind of in like the grand scheme of things now, is definitely still kind of considered a low tier monster. Probably would be like a 2-star in say like a Sunbreak. He does a lot, right? So why don't people like him? Could be a couple of things, right? I think, first of all, his grab bag is a little bit of a mix of obnoxious things. Poison, auto stun, and stealing. That's a lot of stuff that are generally not all that beloved, all kind of brought together in one pouch. I totally forgot about the play dead thing, and I'll talk about why I forgot about the play dead thing in a minute. So the grab bag that he has is a little obnoxious, right? Poison's a little obnoxious, though I don't think it's the most offensive of the status elements. People hate stealing. Auto stun is also generally pretty hated, and with the unlike some other monsters like Zitzi, who I think improved upon the auto flash gimmick, he's got like the full 360-degree just full radius around him. So that can be a little frustrating too. And the rubbery tail is kind of deceptive of like where your safety zone is. It can be very easy to just kind of be caught off guard by that tail and its range. It's awesome that he has a lot of stuff, but it's a lot of like honestly kind of obnoxious stuff really kind of brought up into a bag, right? You know, you take like a Namiel or a Garangolm. Those are some really neat individual abilities that are then wrapped together and brought together and made even cooler by their combination. Garuga is able to combo his short burst roars and his poison tail in a way that feels particularly like not as much annoying as it is dangerous, right? And Gypceros doesn't really feel like dangerous. He feels just kind of annoying. Like none of these things combined feel very threatening, right? They never really kind of congeal into a package that makes Gypceros feel like a threat. It's just kind of like a bunch of abilities put together that are all built around annoying you. I think that's where Gypceros kind of falls apart in comparison to a lot of these other monsters who combine a lot of gimmicks together and are generally very well liked. I think Gypceros' abilities lack synergy. And then on top of that, you have the fact that he's not really the best design, right? Like there's some good looking weirdo monsters out there. There's some good, like, kind of quirky, goofy birds out there. Gypceros has always kind of looked a little derpy. He doesn't look like, he's not like charming ugly, really. He's not cool. He's not really like silly. He's just kind of, he's not like cool ugly, right? I think there's monsters who do kind of like cool ugly better than he does. He's just kind of dorky. He's just kind of dorky. And then you have a lot of abilities where he wastes time. You know, he has, especially in some of the older games, a lot of reliance on just running around filling cross map, going back and forth and back and forth. A lot of the flyers had that, and a lot of them kind of got rid of it because it wasn't very particularly well designed combat. But he never really lost it all that much. So that's kind of what I think about Gypceros. I don't think his design's particularly... again, I forgot about the playing dead thing. The problem with the playing dead thing is that they don't really incorporate it into the game all that much. It might catch you once, right? Like if you watch, say, like the Pro and Noob that Rage Gaming did, Josh was able to catch Cotton on it, like, once. But the UI doesn't... If it's a multi-monster hunt, I don't think the UI changes to, like, do a fake out. And it never plays like the quest complete fanfare. He just kind of topples over dead. And you're just like, what's... Like, the first time it would happen, you're just like, that's not right. That's not how a quest ends, right? And you'd be kind of, like, confused by it for a sec. And then it might catch you. Every other time, though, he just, like, falls over and is like, okay, yeah, I get it. You either get a free carve or you get a free, like, you're just beating the crap out of him while you're waiting for him to stand back up, right? So it's a neat gimmick that kind of just loses its novelty. Because I don't think the actual game systems really do anything with it. So it kind of feels like a half-baked idea. And a monster playing possum, that's something kind of cool. I don't think really anything else in these games does that. But the game doesn't really allow it to do what it's supposed to do, right? And I'd be interested to see if they play around with it a little bit more. You know, if a Gypceros made his way into Wilds, which... that'd be kind of neat, right? If he made his way into Wilds, then, you know, you have, like, a really dangerous monster, like Gypceros is minding his own business, and a Rathalos comes swooping down, and the Gypceros will just kind of, like, freeze up and keel over and play dead, you know, like possums do in real life. And just kind of, like, and maybe, like, emits you know, in game, like, emits an odor, like possums do, to deter animals from eating them while they're playing dead. That could be something, right? If they played around with it a little bit more in, like, an ecological sense, because in terms of, like, a gameplay sense, it's an idea that just the game doesn't really play around with. And I think you can maybe do something with that to make the playing possum a little bit more impactful. Gypceros' probably neatest contribution to Monster Hunter is its role with Nursilla, and that is in being a skinned corpse. Yeah, no, you don't really have Nursilla if you don't have Gypceros, which is cool. I would not be opposed to Gypceros coming back. I wouldn't hate seeing him again. I think he needs work. I think they need to play around with some of his abilities a little bit. I think they need to gel a little bit better. I think maybe a nice, like, HD render of him with maybe, like, a couple of very subtle tweaks. Like, I don't want them to completely rework him, but if a little bit of a facelift might be able to kind of bring out, kind of just make his ugliness a little bit more charming. Because I'm not against monsters being ugly, that's fine, but I don't think he ever, like, really was kind of like a good, cool, like, weirdo ugly. I thought he was always just kind of like a stupid looking ugly, right? Kind of like an embarrassing looking ugly. They could, with like a proper little tweaks here and there, I think you could make him look a little bit more presentable, even if you want to keep him looking kind of goofy, looking kind of derpy, looking kind of ugly. I think there's ways you can get that to look a little bit better. I do think he's flawed, but I think he's there's definitely room there. I can see the reality where Gypceros is able to kind of like pool his abilities together a little bit better. And is able to make himself a little bit more of a threat. If you want to lean towards him being a little bit more of a gross out monster, I think you can do that. There's room for Gypceros to get better, and there's room for him to be seen again. Purple, on the other hand, I don't know, feels a little superfluous to me. I took a look at him, kind of like Blue Kut Ku, doesn't have a ton of new stuff to him. A little bit more aggressive. The globs of poison that he fires off are a little bit larger, and he does toxin instead of the normal poison. So he does the more potent poison. And I'm going to be honest, I don't like his colors as much, because you have kind of like a nice deep dark purple with like a neon, like kind of like cerulean green tail. They're not bad colors. I don't think they look terribly natural, especially the green tail. It's like, I like it as it's kind of like its own thing, but I don't know. Like, I feel like with Blue Kut Ku, right, there's some stuff there, because Blue Kut Ku has an insane version from Frontier. You want to compile that into a 6th generation Blue Kut Ku, there you go. Maybe you could do some really crazy stuff with a purple Gypceros, but like, I don't know. I don't care enough about purple Gypceros to really care all that much. I don't think he looks quite as good as the normal one. I think the blue with kind of like the more fleshy colors works better than the purple. The toxin doesn't really do anything for me. With this one, I think like with blue versus normal Kut Ku, I think I like their colors almost about the same. I'd be fine if we never saw purple again. I'm fine with it. Like, there's not a lot that's really brought to the table. At least not yet. Maybe if they wanted to bring around purple back and they wanted to make him crazy, go for it. But like, I'll root for Gypceros to come back and to have something kind of cool to do, and to have something added to him. I don't know. Purple's just a little bit more of him, and I don't like him looking at him quite as much. The OG. The first monster designed, and the wyvern who sits on the logo for the original game, is Rathian. Let's get her up there right off the bat. I really like Rathian. I think Rathian's an underrated monster. To be fair, though, Rathian has been very stale and very stagnant for a long time. Rathian needs a pick-me-up. Rathian needs something new to do. And I think, honestly, one of the best things they could do is look at online, because she was the flagship of online for a good little while. And the Rathian in online, and vice versa, the Conflagration Rathian variation within that game, had some actually really cool mix-ups on what the conventional Rathian could do. So right off the bat, you have a resource that you can take her and really kind of play around with her. She's gotten the new move here and there over the years. She's a little bit more of a capable flyer in Rise. Yeah, no, Rathian is, like, even more than Rathalos, I think is like the model flying wyvern. She's got like a good mix of land movements and air movements, doesn't stay up in the sky too long, has poison and has fire. The backflip is pretty famous. I wish there was like a little bit more to say in terms of combat. She does have like the wyvern fire burst, right? And she's actually a more, up until like Rise, she was the more prolific fire user of the two, because Rathalos only ever had the single shot fireballs. But now she has the multi-shot, and she has like the big wyvern fire explosion, which is kind of cool. I think I really like Rathian, like lore-wise, right? Like she's a tough monster. She'll go up against Glavenus. She can kind of get bested by Cephadrome. But she's very kind of like a loyal den mother. She'll fight to the death to protect her young, to the fact that she can deter monsters that are usually kind of more powerful than her, just because she's so determined to protect her youth that she'll kind of go to the death for it. Whereas A predator might not be willing to go as far as she would. I really like her ecology cutscene in Freedom Unite, where she's seen like feeding her young. I think she has like a really neat kind of relationship with Rathalos, where the two will fight together, where the two have different aspects of their territory that they'll patrol, that they'll call each other for assistance in battle. I think the ancient forest really kind of articulated the differences in how the two of them operate, whilst how they operate with one another. I think Rathian's really cool. The Wraths are really cool. They're very, especially when you dig into how they work in terms of their lore and in terms of their ecology, they get more cool as you look into them. Gameplay wise, Rathalos has really grown. Rathian kind of hasn't. She gets like her new thing, maybe like once a generation. She's due to get like a couple of new things. And like I said a bit ago, I think online is the treasure trove you want to be going after. That's where Rathian has a lot of cool stuff. If you want to devise up some other stuff too, go right ahead. Other cool thing about Rathian, I think, is just how much she's changed design-wise over the generations. Which again, like kind of like a lore ecology thing, where you have technically different like subspecies of the regular Wraths, to the fact where they don't get like their own unique name in terms of like a gameplay sense, but like the Rathian and Rathalos of, say, the regions of like the 3rd and the 4th generation. So like the areas around like Moga Village and Valhabar and Yukumo and those areas, those are technically a different like subspecies of the Rathians that you find in like the 1st and 2nd generation games, and those are a different subspecies of the typical Rathian and Rathalos that you fight in World and whatnot. I think it's really cool to look at how the Wraths have looked, Rathian especially, because Rathian has changed even a little bit more drastically than Rathalos has. I think my favorite incarnation is probably, again, like with Rathalos, probably like the 3rd and 4th one. Like they have a lot more brown built into her, and a lot more kind of like cream colors built in, where she's super duper green in the old games, which is it's kind of cool to look how much they've changed. But yeah, no, from like an in-world perspective, those are technically like different, categorically different subspecies of the Wraths, and they don't do that with a ton of the monsters. Zinogre gets a little bit of that treatment, which is kind of cool, where he'll change from region to region, but a lot of the others don't really have that, but the Wraths do, and I think that's always been a really cool part of them. So yeah, Rathian is due for more stuff. I think you really kind of give her a nice big overhaul in Wilds. We're looking at an absolute classic. For right now, all reliable, easy. One very big praise I can give to Rathian is that she is, in almost every game, she has been, a tester monster for me. Because her moveset is just kind of like, just reliable enough and simple enough, yet also has like her flying and her projectiles and her backflip and whatnot. It has kind of like a nice little bit of everything. She's got like a very simple interpretations of everything. That when I want to test out a new weapon, I usually go to Rathian, because it's simple enough, but has enough to it that I can really kind of like experiment with different moves and whatnot, and like how to factor in different like defensive capabilities on certain weapons and whatnot. And yeah, Rathian's a really good training monster, and I've appreciated her for a long time for that, because I think there's like just enough depth to her, with just enough simplicity to her, that I can reliably learn a new weapon and actually get some decent experience out of it without being like pressured down by a very oppressive high damage monster. Like, I feel like I actually really get to learn a weapon with Rathian. I think she's balanced very, very well for that, and I appreciate her a lot for that. So yeah, Rathian's up and all reliable. I think Pink is gonna go right up in here and perfectly fine. Pink's never been my favorite. I think there's other Wraths that look better than her, both in main series and beyond that. She does have kind of a cool thing though, where she has her like reinterpretation of the backflip, which is the more like spinning variation of it. My buddies and I called it the Tatsumaki, after the spin kick from Street Fighter. the Tatsumaki Senpuyaku or whatever. So we call it the Tatsumaki every time we're fighting Pink Rathian and Gold Rathian, and they do like the spin tail flip, which is a really cool move. That is the bulk of what she has, honestly. And then like a couple of minor variations here and there. I do want to talk about the Pink and Azure Wraths in a video at one point. I think they're probably going to get a Let's Make Blank Fun video at some point. Because I think they are kind of neat, but I think they need a little bit more. So Pink's got her one like signature move. I like that signature move. Definitely could do something else with her, right? Because I feel like there really isn't too much of a gimmick with her. I feel like with Pink Rathian and Azure, we'll talk about in a little bit. These are monsters that have yet to really kind of earn their keep. They really kind of just enhance one particular trait of Rathian and Rathalos, and don't really have too much of their own identities beyond that, and don't even really kind of play with those heightened gimmicks as much as they could, in my opinion. And yeah, I think like Pink looks fine. I do like, I used a lot of 3rd and 4th generation because I think that's where the Wraths use their best. She looks pretty good in this. I think she's mega super washed out in World. I don't think she looks all that good at all in World. So yeah, she could come back for sure. All right, let's talk about Metal Wraths. Metal Wraths are some of the best variations that we have nowadays. Especially there's some of the best looks at how you can take some of these old classics and really kind of bump them up. I might jump the gun a little. I think both of them are really going to go up into absolute classics at this point. I think they are super well designed. You have shifting in their elemental weaknesses to kind of subvert expectations a little bit on that. They're very heavily armored, which you kind of have to play around with. They have different weak points that you have to play around with. Originally, you're in the lead up, so 1st through 4th generation, the Metal Wraths would probably be pretty low. I think they'd probably be pretty down here. Mostly because of their very heavily armored gimmick and the fact that they move the weak point away from the head, right? Kind of obnoxious to deal with. I'm not a big fan of the pre-5th generation Metal Wraths. The overhaul is amazing, because not only with just some of the more movement options and more just kind of like dynamic verticality and stuff like that, not only is it a little bit easier to get to their wings and to their tail tips, which are their new main weak points, so it's a little bit easier to kind of play around with their armor shifting. On top of that, it's pretty easy to get to purple sharpness nowadays and to maintain purple sharpness nowadays. So even if you're doing less damage on the torso or the legs or the head, you can still kind of get through, right? So that's appreciated. It's definitely easier to kind of keep yourself up in that threshold. So you're not going to bounce up at the highest sharpness, which is nice. But then you have the Hellfire mechanic, and the Hellfire mechanic changes everything. Not only does it soften up the body in their more dangerous state, so you're incentivized to play a little bit riskier, it opens up their major weak point back again, so you're bouncing a whole lot less, and then just like the pure spectacle of what she can do. I want to talk about Gold specifically, but a lot of this is going to double back and reapply to Silver. Gold Rathian's awesome. I could use for maybe like a little, again, it's kind of like a washout saturation issue that a lot of the 5th gen Wraths suffer from. She's gonna come back, right? She's gonna be in whatever Wild's ultimate is. She is. Don't cry about it. They are. That's just how the G rank expansions work. You're always gonna get the medals, and at this point, I'm very happy to have them, and I would be kind of sad if they didn't show up, honestly. So when they come back around, I'll be happy to see a little bit more color of them. They're very kind of like washed out, like super duper, like. I mean, they kind of even look a little bit more like the actual medals do, which is kind of a nice touch, but I prefer a little bit more color. Gold Rathian just does a lot of really cool stuff with her big kind of like supercharged fireball, so they play up with Rathian's more kind of potent fire with her own Wyvern Fire and her fireball volleys that she has. So they give Rathian like these nice big heavy fireball charge shots, which are really cool and not too difficult to deal with. She has a lot of ability to cancel her charges into her backflips, into her spinning backflips. And again, they're nice and challenging and threatening and tough to deal with, but like I've never found them to be too bullshit to deal with. I think they're balanced pretty well. They're nice and just fast and strong and cool looking. They have shifting weak points. They have different elemental resistances. they're just so cool to fight. I love fighting the Metal Wraths now. And I think they even got a nice little bump up in 5th generation in Sunbreak. Actually, I think they're even a smidge better in Sunbreak than they were in Iceborne. Their biggest problem in Iceborne is like you could only really fight them in like the Nergigante nest, but in unless you fought them out in the Guiding Lands, which was much better, they were really obnoxious to fighting in Nerg's nest. But and now they can be on normal maps in Sunbreak, which is awesome. They're in the Forlorn Arena in Sunbreak, which is nice and big and wide and open. Like they're just more fun to fight, just from like a map standpoint, from a combat standpoint. I think they're super duper well designed. They look great. Silver's gonna be up here too, but we'll figure out when. Okay, so here's the question of the day, right? Is Rathalos an all-reliable or an absolute classic? Oh, actually, I'll nudge that right there. So where does Rathalos go in all this? Because for a good long while, Rathalos was kind of just this middle-of-the-road okay fight that was really just kind of a measuring stick for how the changes in Monster Hunter were going along, right? For a good long while, Rathalos was nothing really to write home about, but if you follow him game by game by game by game, you can tell how much like the combat design and the AI and the animations has improved, right? He was a really good like 5 to 6 out of 10 for a really long time. And then Sunbreak comes around, and I think he's legitimately fantastic. I think he's intelligent. I think he combines his fire with his flying with his talons really well. This was something I was talking about with Yian Garuga, where you have a monster with a grab bag of abilities who very intelligently knows how to combine them all together to make himself more dangerous. I think the flamethrower was an awesome addition. I think the way he fights is an awesome addition. He's still in the air a good amount of time, but he just does so much stuff up in the air now that it's much less obnoxious, and there's so much less wasted time. You're always kind of reacting to something he's doing up there. And he comes down at a pretty nice amount of balance of time. And I think just in terms of, this is a kind of belaboring a point, but you look at how good he got in Sunbreak and how much just the collection of new stuff he got in terms of his moveset and his AI, and he is a model for stuff that's also gone stale. Stuff like Tigrex, which has gone a little stale. Stuff like Narga, which has gone a little stale. Rajang, who needs a facelift pretty bad next time he comes back around. Rathian, who's gotten a little bit stale. Rathalos is very indicative of the fact that a lot of this old guard can get the changes that they need to be really big heavy hitters and to be really, really good in the modern setting, where you have the faster turn angles and you have the more intelligent monsters and you have more complexity in how they go about doing things. But do you judge Rathalos just by the Rise and Sunbreak incarnations? Because he has a long, long, long history of really just kind of being like a 5 or a 6 in terms of quality. Very, very middle of the road. And that's worth discussing, right? Because there's a lot of different incarnations of this guy. It also stands to mention of like, and I want to play the original Monster Hunter to really kind of say this for myself and my own personal experience, but he is in the original games, it's very much kind of like a holy, this is it. Like, this is the guy. This is the guy on the box art. This is the big bad. In a game that's as very kind of narratively simple as those old Monster Hunters were, there is definitely kind of like a magnificence and a grandeur to him, which is really cool. Not every flagship, even some of the ones who have better story presence, not all of them kind of have that kind of like majesty to it. Just by like, for in relation to like how monsters worked and how the mechanics worked and how kind of clunky and difficult the games were, there is kind of like a dread to him, kind of built into how tough the original game is to kind of get through. But yeah, no, he kind of just sat on his laurels and rested on his laurels for a very long time, and has been kind of like just kind of a punching bag for some of the new Flying Wyverns for a very long time. And that does kind of like hurt him a little bit. The best incarnation of him by a wide margin, and I'll keep talking about how potentially important his fight can be, people still talk about how good his changes, him and Kushala Daora, and how good their changes were, and how the Rise team really kind of nailed how good Rathalos could be. So I think Rathalos is probably going to be probably bottom out the absolute classics, because he is, right? In terms of like an out of game sense and like a meta sense, you know, he's the flag waver, he's the guy on the front of all the boxes. Because I'm a fan of these games so much, you know, my parents know what Rathalos is, right? People who don't play Monster Hunter know who Rathalos is at this point. In that sense, he's absolutely an absolute classic. Like, he's a fantastic mascot. I think now he's legitimately really good. And something I'm really excited about is I'm really excited to see what they're going to do with him in Wilds, right? Because it looks like the maps are probably going to be a lot more open. So, you know, how do you function like a flying monster in like a much like bigger, grander, wider vista? Like, giving him that much kind of like wing space, just kind of like stretch out and move around. Like, what are you going to do with him with that? I'm very interested just in how Rathalos is going to fight in Wilds. I'm very interested in what he's going to be able to do. And by the looks of it, number one, it seems like he's got a lot of his color back. And number two, he has, or at least in that trailer, he has one of his classic sound effects back. So you're telling me that in Wilds, we might be getting like a 3rd or 4th generation saturated Rathalos with classic sound effects that has the fight quality of Rise and Sunbreak? Like, I'm legitimately excited to see what this dude's going to be able to do. I'm very excited for Rathalos, specifically in Wilds. And this this channel kind of rides Rathalos a lot, but I don't give a I'm more than happy to. You know, I love this guy. He's probably going to bottom out the absolute classics a lot just because, like I said, he has a long history of average. Like, he's really good now. Better late than never, honestly. Better late than never. Azure. Okay. Azure's an interesting one. I'm rooting for Azure to come back. I think Azure needs to come back. With how good variations are getting, with how good Rathalos' flight mechanics are now, Azure being the Rathalos who accentuates the flight capabilities of the monster is due to come back now that the flying is much better. Azure struggles to have a lot of plays, right? Because he's regarded as like the Rathalos who exemplifies the worst qualities of Rathalos. That being the very tedious up in the air flying, never kind of touches down, just kind of meandering around in the air. I recommend you watch Heavy Wings' video about Rathalos, because he kind of goes into a lot of the moves that Azure got over the years, and the regular Rathalos kind of just generally pilfered a lot of those moves, a lot of those aerial moves for himself, and just kind of built upon it and built upon it and built upon it. So Azure's kind of gotten a little less special as the years have gone on, as his counterpart has taken a lot of what he was able to do. I don't remember the specific examples, but I remember watching Heavy Wings' video about it and being kind of intrigued by some of the stuff that Rathalos had taken from Azure over the years. So I'd recommend that video, and just Heavy Wings' channel in general. Makes good stuff. He just flies a little bit more. He doesn't really have any of his own moves anymore. The regular Rathalos kind of took him. He just flies more. And the flying that was in like Generations and 5th Generation and in Worlds was not all that great. What I will say about Azure is, and I'm wondering who will agree with me here, 3rd and 4th Generation Azure Rathalos, I think, is the best looking Rathalos. With the green wings and the red spike on the tail and like the really nice blue, and it had like harsher blacks in his design, which really kind of let everything else pop. 3rd and 4th Generation Azure Rathalos is the best looking Rathalos. I was just talking about it a second ago. I'm really kind of pulling for Azure and Pink to be in Wilds, because it's looking like we're getting the saturation bumped back up. So we can get Green Wing Azure back in Wilds. I would be actually pretty happy. And if you want to give him a lot of the flight that Sunbreak Rathalos has, and even kind of like leave regular Rathalos kind of where he is, but give Azure like some more stuff, like a little bit more speed, a little bit more combos, some stuff like that, and really kind of like play up the strengths that the new flight mechanics have. Hell yeah, man. But that's a little wish listy, right? As he is in World and Iceborne, he is pretty flawed. He lacks a lot of his own identity. His design got super duper washed out. Like, he does not look particularly good in World and Iceborne. He just doesn't really have that much of his own stuff anymore. Yeah, no, he's just a Rathalos who does more of the worst aspects of Rathalos in that game. So I think Azure kind of needs help. And I think I think Azure definitely deserves that kind of a glow up, because I think he deserves a little bit of respect, as he's like the flagship of the variations. I talked about this a whole bunch in the honorable mentions of the Christmas special that I did. Check that out if you haven't. He's the front runner of the monster variation idea. So subspecies, rare species, variants, deviants, apexes, burst species, origin species, lone species, exotic species, and explore. That comes out of Azure Rathalos. And it took some time for that gimmick to really kind of manifest itself, right? You know, for a lot of these subspecies we're looking at today, it took some time and a couple of history and incarnations for them to get really good. But like the concept of monster variations is one of the greatest like ever in hindsight, right? Now that we're in like the 5th generation, when variations are getting really, really good. So I think he deserves respect for that. I think he deserves to come back for that. I think he deserves to really kind of like flesh out who he is and really kind of capitalize on the strengths that Rathalos has now, and really kind of like take that ball and run with it and make him kind of as cool as can be, and give him his old design back. I think he deserves that. But as he is right now, where we left him, he's in a rough spot. Silver is very much the opposite. It's going to be a little bit of a toss-up which one I prefer over silver and gold, but a lot of what I said about Gold Rathian applies to Silver Rathalos, right? Cool changes in the weaknesses, cool changes in the weak points. It's pretty easy to get purple sharpness nowadays, so the heavy armor is still kind of a threat, but less of an annoyance than it used to be. Hellfire mode is amazing. The colors are really good. Probably could use a little bit more... Like, I like him as a little bit more of a white Rathalos than he is as, like, a really, really metally silver. You might be able to find a nice kind of, like, fine line with that in the next game. I'd be totally cool with that. Yeah, no. Awesome, awesome monster. And again, he has a lot of the strengths that the Rise and Sunbreak Rathalos has. Pretty good flying mechanics, doesn't waste a whole lot of time. Even though he's in the air quite a bit, you're reacting to a lot of stuff. So, it doesn't feel very time-wasty. And his spectacle of fire attacks are just amazing. He took a couple of pages out of, I think, Dread King's book and took a couple of moves at it from him, which he used really, really well. The blue flame explosions and like the lines and sweeping sheets of fire he can put down, and the big rapid fire bursts of explosives he can fire out. Like, the fight is quick, it's aggressive, it's spooky, it's high damage. And again, and Silver capitalized on that a ton. I think I like Silver maybe just like a smidge more than Gold, just because I think Silver's just like that extra little bump of heavier adrenaline, that extra little bump of extra spectacle, that extra little bump of a really cool design. Yeah, he's like a smidge. I think I like him just like a little bit better, even though Gold Rathian in like a couple of places is even like a little bit better. I think like in terms of like physical moveset, I think Gold is a little bit better. I think in terms of spectacle and fire moveset, I think Silver's a little bit better. I think Silver's just like the slightest smidge more fun. All right, let's talk about another one that a lot of people don't like. Let's talk about Khezu. Let's talk about Khezu. What do I think about Khezu? I think a lot of things about Khezu. I think a lot about Khezu doesn't really work. But I think Khezu's gotten a little bit better. I think he has been pretty much completely outdone by Giganox. I think his body shape really kind of fails to convey the terror and the horror and the fear and the unsettling nature that they were going for. Especially in like the classic games before the textures got really good, he kind of looks like a 3D model of a basic wyvern that they haven't really stretched and shaped all that much in like Blender, and then they like gave him like some teeth and whatnot. Like he's again, quoting the Pro and Noobs series, he's a big white sphere with a penis coming out of him. The very rotund, very stocky, very pudgy body design, I think robs him of the fear factor that he was going for, as opposed to Nox, who is lithe and flat and creepy and like suctions his whole body up and like is flat up against cave ceilings and whatnot. This guy is a big white golf ball walking around on the ceilings of caves. Like, he's not particularly inconspicuous. He's not terribly scary, inspiring shape, right? I think the general shape of his body hinders the fear factor that he's trying to create. The lack of music makes him very unexhilarating. And I get it, right? Like, it was a neat idea on paper. He doesn't look at you, he smells you. So, and what kind of triggers the exclamation point and that, like, that sudden shock of music that they used to have, and triggering the music was the monster looking at you. Like, you remember from the UI, they'd have an icon of an eye, meaning that a monster's looking at you, or looking at your teammates. And Khezu never got that, right? And on paper, neat idea. In terms of execution, it robs tension, it robs exhilaration. Like, music does a lot of lifting, a lot of extra work to sell what you're going up against. So the lack of music is meant to kind of create this kind of like uneasy sense around it, but it doesn't. And it's become a superfluous detail because we have other blind monsters who don't work like this. We have Soulseer, who's blind, his music plays. We have Gore, who's blind, his music plays. I don't remember if Giganox is blind, but his music plays, right? And it's obnoxious because they've not even if you like Giganox over Khezu, but I think just in terms of design, in terms of music, in terms of abilities, in terms of creep factor and fear factor, you have a monster in Giganox which successfully pulled off all of the things that I think Khezu fails at, and they refuse to bring him back, and they keep bringing the inferior monster back. Even if, like, Khezu's not horrible, I think he legitimately has a superior, but they keep bringing him back. And it makes Khezu more frustrating. If they want to bring Khezu and Giganox back, I'm totally fine. But they keep sidelining what is, I think, honest to God, objectively, their better creation in this category. A bit of a failure in what he was supposed to go for. And then we want to talk about the fight, right? For a good long while, this was one of my least favorite fights. It's still not a great fight, right? With the electrical barrier he has around him, it's either, if you're running ranged or you're running like a weapon with a guard point, it's an opportunity to beat the crap out of them. If you're not doing either of those things, it creates a very, very slow-paced fight where you're just waiting for his electrical barrier shield to go down, and there's no music playing, so it just... Old Khezu could be a crawl. Just a slog to get through, because he burns a ton of time with his electricity, he burns a ton of time with his roars, and there's no music. And then it just lacks any and all intensity in that regard. I think he's just very, especially old Khezu, is very flawed in his design. But let's talk about Rise and Sunbreak Khezu. So the shape can't be fixed, but what was fixed is a lot of the texture and detail work. I think that really helped Khezu a ton, because even though he still has this kind of stocky, doughy looking body, the translucence on the skin, the veins running through everything, the extra detail on the gums and the snaggling of the teeth and whatnot, that helped make him creepy. It really did. You can see the veins coursing through his body and just like kind of like the blood veins and whatnot just running through him, and he looks like he has that translucent skin. Like, I think that the texture and the detail work on the modern Khezu is really well done. I think it's really well done. And on top of that, he has some new attacks and some better pacing. Just because his move pool is a little bit broader now, he's able to do a little bit more stuff. He cycles his electrical barrier a little bit more into like his charge attacks a little bit more, so it lasts a little bit shorter. I do kind of appreciate when he has like the false stop on his electrical shock to kind of fake you out and bait you into closing distance a little bit. I think that's kind of a neat thing to do. But he has him down with his neck and he sweeps it across the ground. And the other is these like arc shot projectiles of his lightning. And I think these are two legitimately good attacks. Honestly, I think they're fun to play around with. They're fun to interact with. I think like especially his arc shots are kind of nice and dangerous. So if you're trying to clear distance to go heal, you kind of have to worry about those a little bit. I think they're like legitimately good. So I think Rise did him a lot of legitimate favors. I think he is definitely far from awful. But I do think he does have fundamental issues. I think he has issues that just aren't going to be fixed. And I think they were fixed in another monster that they just won't bring back. You know, if you want to keep using Khezu, that's honestly perfectly fine. I think you should bring in Giganox, because I think Giganox succeeded where I think Khezu failed in some categories. Again, I think the graphical update did a lot of good in making Khezu kind of be able to do what you wanted him to do. I still think the lack of music is kind of asinine in this day and age, because, again, we have blind monsters who have music. So Khezu is pretty flawed. He is pretty flawed, honestly, but there's also a part of me that kind of, I think, that's kind of the question, right? Do I think he's better than Iodrome and Velocidrome? Maybe this will switch around, but I'm kind of feeling this. I think just like Velocidrome just kind of has, I don't know, like he does his simple thing really, really well. I think this guy has a lot of faltering. There's a legitimate argument for him to go down here, but I don't know. I feel like, maybe I might play around with this a little bit more. But yeah, no, he is pretty flawed. Like I was talking about, there's stuff you kind of can't fix about him. Except for, like, the music you can fix about him, but I don't think they will. Let's talk about the red Khezu. Let's talk about this guy. I'd be actually pretty interested to see red Khezu come back. And if that brings back the regular Khezu, that's fine, because I'm kind of interested in this guy. Like I said, I was watching some of the 4U fights before we started this, and red Khezu actually has, like, a decent grab bag of stuff. That, even, like, the refurbished Khezu of Generations and Rise doesn't have. He's got some different attacks with his extendable neck. He's got some different attacks with his lightning. He's got, like, this prolonged detonating lightning. I think he combos a lot better. I think he legitimately, like, looks a little bit better. Especially, this render is super duper good. The in-game model is not nearly this good. But I think with this amount of, like, gloss and sheen on him, like, I think, like, red Khezu from 4 Ultimates render looks, like, actually kind of sick. I would love to see a red Khezu that actually, like, looks like this in-game. I think that would be awesome for him. He lacks a lot of the time killing that the original Khezu has, and more so had. Khezu's definitely better pace than he used to be. I think he still has pacing issues. From what I saw of red Khezu, doesn't really seem to have some of those pacing issues whatsoever. I think he's really kind of rectified a lot of that. I think he just uses his lightning a little bit better. I think he just has more stuff to do. I think he looks a little bit better. And what also is interesting about red Khezu, he's one of very few monsters, and this is, I think, like, in terms of game lore, still kind of like a hypothesis, is that the red Khezu are the origin of the species, and that Khezu with albinism became just a little bit more successful and a little bit more populous than your typical red Khezu, as they're a little bit more specialized for their particular environments. I actually quite like red Khezu. And I'd love to see a version of him that has the quality of design that this one promises. The regular one doesn't look quite this good, but it still looks fine. Honestly, I think the red looks a little bit better than the white. The only issue is, with design-wise, I think the white looks really, really good for the translucent skin that he has now. So if you bring in a red Khezu with the modern graphics, what are you going to do to really kind of emphasize the translucence? You're going to have, like, darker red veins, maybe even, like, I don't know, kind of like a blue type of thing. I think you can make that kind of Khezu look kind of gnarly. But yeah, like, legitimately, I think Red Khezu in 4 Ultimate looks actually pretty great. Like, as a fight, I think he looks kind of sick. Go back and check him out for yourselves, honestly. I think he legitimately looks like a good fight. I think he's legitimately looks like a good design. I think he has some really cool ecology as a subspecies that's kind of different, with really kind of primordial Malzeno being one of the few that kind of share that variation, being the monster of origin type of ordeal. I'd like to get Red Khezu back. I'd love to see him with some updated graphics and maybe like a couple of tweaks to the moveset, but from what I saw, doesn't need that much. Alright, let's talk about Rock Baby Basarios. I learned from the online premiere that a lot of you guys actually don't like Basarios. Kind of surprised me a little bit. I mean, I kind of get it, right? He's got his super rocky armor that's very easy to bounce off of, doesn't have a lot of weak points. I think he's definitely the inferior to his father. But Basarios I've always kind of I've liked. Basarios has a lot of stuff, right? He's got his rocky camouflage, which I don't know. I think they could do a little bit better with, honestly, because it's just a big rock sticking out of the ground. If they wanted to like build him into like the side of like walls on a rocky area, I think that would probably be a little bit cooler for camouflage. As is, you know, you just kind of whack big rocks until you find him. He's got his sleep gas, his poison gas, and his fire breath. So he does a lot of stuff, and I can understand why people don't like him so much, because he has 2 statuses. I've always kind of liked the fact that he's kind of his fire development's always been kind of weak, so that it takes him time to be able to charge up his ability to do his fire breath attack. I've kind of like that little detail about him. He's definitely been improved a little bit for the better in Rise, due to the fact that his body can heat up when he does his fire attacks a little bit. So he's definitely a little bit less obnoxious in that regard than he used to be. I think his texture work looks really, really good. I don't know. He's fine, right? He's fine. I don't love him. I'm kind of disappointed that the big guys weren't in Rise, but I like him fine. I think I'm gonna put him. I'll put him over Pink Rathian and perfectly fine. All right, let's talk about the big guys though. Gravios. I'm a Gravios fan. I really like this guy. And I think he's due to come back. I think he's in the category with your Gammoth and your Duramboros and monsters like that, where he's massive, right? And he didn't really fit the mold for the Rise maps, because for Rise and for a lot of Worlds, because a lot of those maps have the very narrow corridors in between your maps. So he's a monster who probably would have struggled to get in there, really. And that's probably the reason why he's not in Rise. It's very weird that Basarios is in there and he's not. But as you know, we're looking to Wilds, and we're looking at potentially the maps opening way back up. We're looking at Gravios maybe being able to come back alongside some of the other big boys, which I'd be pretty stoked for. As Gravios as is, I think is a pretty good monster, and has a good amount of stuff to him. He loses Basarios' poison gas, but he gets his fire gas now. And the cool thing about the fire gas, right, is it's kind of a get-off-me technique that he has, where, you can punish his fire laser beam really, really easily, but he'll have that gas as like a bit of a get-off-me tool. However, he does have a tell, right? So he'll have like a little puff of red gas under him to let you know whether or not he's going to have that gas expulsion after he does his laser beam. So you can tell whether or not you have to get out from under him or not, which is cool. Having little tells like that is really nice. And it's not always there, so it's something that you have to pay attention for, which is kind of neat. He's got a pretty decent grab bag of moves, right? It's a little simple, right? Because he's so big, I bet he's a little bit tough to work with. I think his little mini fire laser missile things that he got in 4th generation were a really nice upgrade for him. It gives him a lot of like proper menace, as he's just firing off these fire missiles at you at high speed when you're trying to run away from him, which is kind of cool. I do think he's due for a couple of new moves for sure. Just a couple. Honestly, I think he just needs like a decent little grab bag of like 3 new things, and he's cool. What else is neat about Gravios is that he's got a nice like slew of dynamic part breaks. So breaking his legs gives you a topple. He has 2 breaks on the chest and 1 on the back. So if you break off the bits of his chest, You can get it so that when he does his get off me fire blasts out of his stomach, they'll start coming up out of his back instead of out of his stomach, right? So you can actually divert that defensive mechanism away from you and force it to come up out of another thing so that you actually have free reign to punish him during his fire breath ability, which is a really, really cool mechanic to him that you can play around with. And of course, him being so big, you'll hack off his tail. That takes a lot of range off of his tail spins and whatnot, which is kind of neat. But yeah, there's a lot of breaks. There's a lot of chipping away you can do at Gravios. He also has a double mount. Like, if you break his back, you can mount him on his chest to try and go for that second chest break. And getting all that stuff will give you the dynamic shift in his fire gas. So there's a lot of stuff you can... They play around with his breaks a lot. And dynamic part breaks are something that I really, really appreciate in Monster Hunter. And it's something that I think goes a little bit underdeveloped, honestly. So I like Gravios a lot. I think he's due for just like a couple of new things, and then he's like solid. He's locked in. But in terms of a design, he's awesome. Just like this big hulking rock tank that lives in lava, which is awesome. Looks really cool. Has some cool biology if you look into like how his internal organs are all like congregated into the center of his body so that it'll protect them from the heat. Maybe not like the... It doesn't, like, make complete and utter sense, but I do like some of the attention to detail that they do with Gravios to kind of explain somewhat how he works. Yeah, no, I like Gravios a lot. I think I'm going to put him right up in here, just a little bit above Rathian, with two monsters that could use, like, a little bit of extra stuff here and there, but are pretty darn solid. I think Gravios really just needs, like, those 1-2 couple of touch-ups, and he's an absolute classic. And then you got Black Gravios, and Black Gravios is pretty renowned for being a terror of MH4U, of just how aggressive he is, and his big claim to fame is the vertical heat laser that he has. So he has get off me tools that the regular Gravios doesn't have, where he'll fire that lava beam straight down at himself and just sweep the area. Black Gravios is really cool. I remember getting a lot, myself and my party having a lot of deaths to Black Gravios in 4U. Very high damage. His fire beams are a lot trickier just because he has just more to do with them. His design's awesome, too, honestly. Probably would make more sense if he was exclusively in Volcano, just from kind of like a lore sensibility, because that's kind of how you get a Black Gravios, is he's just been in the Volcano for so long that his hide's just charred and seared black. And it makes sense why he's, more knowledgeable about his fire powers, is he's just probably had longer access to them and had more practice with them. So I really like Black Gravios. Is he an absolute classic? I have a lot of good, bad memories with him, right? I think, give him a couple, like, the little tweaks that, like, just, like, the missile attack that Gravios got in Generations, and again, like, a couple more fire powers and whatnot, and I think you're super golden. But as is, like, he's a menace, he looks awesome, I have good memories of fighting him, he got a really nice facelift in 4U, he just looks great. Like, Black Gravios is a proper, nice, big, spooky monster. I really like him. Okay, let's talk about the forgotten golden child, Monoblos. I really want to see Monoblos in Wilds. I want him back really bad. Monoblos has been absent for about a decade now. And it's a big shame, because Monoblos, like, almost, again, I really need to play the game, right? But Monoblos almost has more to him than Rathalos does in, like, the original game, because I think it's Monoblos who is the creature who killed the wife of the Jumbo Village chieftain. I think it's Monoblos is kind of like this rite of passage. I think for his whole history he's been offline exclusive, because he's supposed to be like this this proving ground monster, right? This mono-y-mono, like, singular challenge that one hunter goes up against and does battle with, and, like, proves to be the greater warrior. So he's got, like, Monoblos has, like, just a cool presence in terms of, like, Monster Hunter's, like, culture and traditions, right? That, I I think we would do well to have expanded on. That could use a little bit more fleshing out. And he's just been kind of left behind. And I think it's because they just haven't really known too much to do with him. And also Monster Hunter's just been a little bit more global and a little bit more multiplayer oriented, and there's a chance that they might be wanting to preserve that offline only aspect of Monoblos, which isn't so much a thing anymore because they've been getting into the habit of all quests have been offline and online accessible. So that might be the reason they've been keeping him out of it, but I don't know. Fair enough, but I still want to see him. I still want to see him again. I think I kind of like how he looks just a smidge better than Diablos, and I really like how Diablos looks. I think he's really kind of due for a Lunastra treatment, where you take these two monsters who are very, very similar, very closely related, and were borderline kind of just clones in the original games, and really kind of like give the Left Behind one their own thing. Like Lunastra got a pretty great upgrade, at least in my opinion. I know a lot of people don't love the new Lunastra, but I generally kind of like her. And I'd love to see Monoblos get a very similar treatment, where they find a good way to give him some new stuff to do. What exactly that would be, I don't know off the top of my head, but I like him a lot. I do. I like him a lot. Right now, he really kind of just is the one-horned Diablos that got left behind. But in terms of, like, Monster Hunter's cultures and narrative and whatnot, and his significance in the story, he really isn't. It's the gameplay has been holding him back. He needs something new to do. The other thing that kind of holds him back is due to the fact that he hasn't been in 5th gen. He doesn't have some of the gameplay changes that Diablos has had. So he still kind of has the Blos Wyvern's more annoying gimmicks of just charge from one side of the arena, charge the other side of the arena, charge the other side of the arena, dig, meander in the dig for a little bit. So, like, in terms of gameplay, him being stuck in the past does kind of hurt him a little bit. So then the question is, because I think like the classic Bloses are perfectly fine, but I really like him though. So like I'm kind of like I kind of want to put him up here, but I think like objectively he probably more belongs a little bit here, because I think the classic blow structure had some issues. I want him to be here, and I want him to be here. Like this is where I want him to be. I think this is like gameplay wise where he is. I think Diablos has got some nice benefits and is lacking in some of the more annoying things just because he's been around a little bit longer or a little bit more recently. And Monoblos if he was in 5th gen, I think he'd be here. And I think he has potential to be up in here, but I think for right now he's going to be right there. White Monoblos is a little unfortunate, right? Because White Monoblos actually got one really, really cool new move in the form of the Bull Charge, where he mounts his wings down on the ground, or I think this is technically the same criteria as Black Diablos. So she would like put her wing arms down on the ground and like rev up for the Bull Charge and go chasing after you at full speed. And that's something that Black Diablos appropriated in Iceborne. White Monoblos doesn't even necessarily have her signature move being unique to her anymore, which is okay. White Monoblos was also unique to the Everwood, and the Everwood was kind of a neat prototype for stuff to come that I think needed a little bit of work done on it. So I didn't get the chance to fight her a whole ton. But I do remember White Monoblos being like properly aggressive and oppressive, and being like properly pretty intimidating from the amount of damage that she had, the amount of health that she had. The Bull Charge is a really cool move no matter which Blos gets it. You know, I'm fine with both of them having it. If that's like just a move that the in-heat Bloses have, like that's a cool idea. And then we'll talk about this a little bit more with Black Diablos, but the White and the Black Bloses have a really cool gimmick in which their shell changes in terms of like heat cycles, rather. They're looking to mate and whatnot, which is a very unorthodox. It's just not something that a lot of the other monsters like have. Like it's just like a cool justification for their shell to change colors. I think that's pretty neat. That like in turn is why like the Black and the White Monoblos and Diablos are so much more aggressive. It's a cool bit of ecology to them. And then I think white Monoblos is, like, I think it's a good color. I think, again, both of the chromatic blosses have some really good color to them. So I might just... yeah, because I like the color palette a little bit more. And she's the originator of the Bull Charge. And, like, the chromatic blosses have really cool ecology to them. So I'm going to bump them up just one extra level into the upper tier. Again, you want to bring back regular Monoblos? Awesome. I'd love to see white Monoblos brought back with her. And then, all right. So, the Fame Stealer. The two-horned cousin who got to go on. Diablos. I mean, man, Diablos is a good damn monster, dude. I think he needs a little bit of a tweak up, though. So a lot of the things with the classic Diablo structure, right, is that they were oppressive and scary, mostly because they cleared a lot of distance. They created a lot of distance between one another. Had some high damage, but like they were really, really good at just staying away from you and then coming back in for big damage and then going underground and then coming back up for big damage. There wasn't a lot of like fight back opportunities. They were kind of tough to deal with. And personally, I don't think they were terribly well designed. You had the Sonic Bomb trap that you could do with them, which would automatically send them into rage mode, which was a really cool thing you could do with them. And unfortunately, it hasn't been as necessary as it used to be. I think one thing you could do with the Blosses is making their digging a little bit better built into their gameplay again. Like, I think Diablos is more fun to fight now than she was in the other generations. But the way they balanced it, I think they took out a little too much bite and didn't replace it with as much new bites. She combos, yeah, I'll call her she, whatever. Diablos combos a little bit better. Has like a move or two from Bloodbath and Rise, which is kind of neat. And it's generally like a little bit more interesting because it's just way less distance being made. They took out something, the mechanics and the way it functioned that were dangerous but annoying, and they haven't filled it back in with something that's quite as dangerous but more exhilarating. I think Diablos can still be a decent enough challenge at early levels, like when we were going through it the first time, a friend of mine who was newer to World was kind of scared of Diablos, and, you know, rightfully so. Diablos can still hit pretty hard. I think we might be a little too used to them. I think something new needs to come in. And I talked about this a little bit in the Rathalos video. I think you can play around with the digging a little bit more. I think that would be a really cool way to kind of spruce them up a little bit. I think, yeah, no, there's changes needed that would really make Diablos really, really good. I think we don't have the perfect medium yet, because it's a little too easy now. He's a little bit more engaging now, and I think they really need to balance that back out a little bit. I think they need to find something to kind of fill the hole in from some of the stuff that was taken out when he was changed around. So as is, do I like Diablo? I think I like him a little bit more than Gravios, because I think he's, just because of some of the combo abilities that he has in 5th generation, he's still just a little bit more engaging than this guy. I think Black Gravios is still going to take it, because Black Gravios is nice and terrible and dangerous. Black Diablos, on the other hand, I think is going to go right up and around here. Black Diablos, just for how powerful she was, how aggressive she was. She got white Monoblos's Bull Charge in Iceborne. I think just from how tough she is. Like, she's not even super duper different from World's Diablos. She's just like a little bit more, right? A little bit tougher, a little bit faster, a little bit stronger, a little bit smarter. I think there's just like that little bit of extra oomph in Black Diablos and Iceborne, where I think she's like she's like a proper threat. Like tempered Black Diablos in Iceborne was something you don't really with, not lightly, at least. I think they made a legitimately good fight out of her, just even if it's just by pure numbers in some respects. I think she's still like pretty tough. I think Black Diablos is really good. Like white Monoblos, I like the chromatic blosses. I think look super duper good. Like the very deserty coloration that these guys have looks great. I really like how the core ones look. But these two are super eye-catching for me. I think they look great. You. Okay. Do I bottom of the barrel Cephadrome? Cephadrome, I think, is one of the most obnoxiously designed monsters ever made, especially its first and second generation incarnations. In fourth generation, that being 4 Ultimate and Generations, they had no idea. They knew why people hated him, but they had no idea what's. It is a much, much, much more exasperated versions of the classic Blosses, where there's so much distance being created, and it's so obnoxious and so time-wasty. That when they brought him over into more recent incarnations, they fixed that up a little bit, but had no idea what to fill it in. At least, like, the new Diablos have some good combos, and have some neat new attacks and whatnot, and are still, like, properly aggressive and whatnot. 4th generation Cephadrome is nothing. It's like you neutered a dog. It's like you had a really obnoxious dog, and then you neutered that dog, and its personality is just gone. Right? But man, it was a really obnoxious dog. I think Cephadrome, classic Cephadrome, might be one of the worst design things they've ever made. I get the point, right? They wanted to make like a land, like a sand. They wanted to make a shark of the desert. And in doing that, what they wanted to do was have it like circle the arena. You just have like the dorsal fin circling the arena. But the desert regions were so big, right? And it just ran around and ran around and ran around and wasted so much time. And yeah, you had sonic bombs. Sure, you had tools. But it didn't stay out of the ground for very long. If it would come up out of the ground out of its own volition to fight you, it would be up out of the ground for about 2 minutes. If you sonic bombed it out of the ground, it would stay out of the ground for like 15 seconds. And you could only bring so many sonic bombs. And it would just go back in and circle and not do nothing. And its moveset on the ground is nothing. It's nothing. It's mildly less obnoxious in 4th gen. And there's probably like a couple of new physical attacks. I can't be bothered to really remember what they are. Because they're, even when he's not the worst design thing in the world, they just put nothing back into him. He's just a neutered dog. If they could find a way to put something interesting in there, fine, right? You want to take a chance on Cephadrome again, fine. But you're gonna have to figure out something to do with him. Or that is a burned slot if you ever bring him back. Because he's either been the worst fight probably in Monster Hunter, or he's just been nothing. He's just a less interesting desert Plesioth. I am perfectly fine with leaving him in the past. Though I think the door is a little bit more open for Cephadrome to come back and get something interesting than Purple Gypceros. I have just no strong feelings about Purple Gypceros. There might be something here. There might be something with the Sand Shark. And you know what? Even in addendum to that, the concept of like being circled around and hunted by a shark in a terrain that's not water has been done before. Has been done better, rather. Iceborne's Beatotus is an underrated monster that took what Cephadrome was going for and made it interesting. It's not the best thing ever made, but Beatotus is the best Piscean Wyvern, and he did a lot of what Cephadrome wanted to do and did it better. And to make Cephadrome better, you're probably going to have to borrow a lot of Beatotus, and at that point, just bring in Beatotus. He's better looking, he has better sound design, better design overall, more interesting elemental shenanigans. You can leave Cephadrome in the past. There might be something, but like, if he never comes back again, I understand. Okay, let's talk about some more controversial monsters. I am a little bit more merciful to Plesioth. I still think Plesioth needs help. And what happened was, even though Plesioth has been brought back a couple of times, they never fixed his hitboxes. Up until Generations Ultimate, they're still bad. They're still poorly made. They never fixed them. He's been in the original Monster Hunter. He's been in the portable games. He's been in Tri-Ultimate. He is in Generations and Generations Ultimate. And they still haven't fixed the hitboxes. And the hip check is bad. The tail whip is mega bad. The tail whip is really, really, really bad. The hip check will hit in the opposite direction of where it should hit, and that's really obnoxious. The tail whip is broken. broken bad. I feel like there's more you can do with him, right? You can do a little bit more with his sleep scales off of his wings. I feel like you can do a little bit more with the water beams that he has, just like a couple of different angles and whatnot. Couple new physical moves here and there. If they bring underwater back, I think you can play around with them a little bit more. I was talking to a buddy a little while ago, and he said that the underwater Plesioth in 3 Ultimate honestly wasn't that bad. I don't know what weapon he ran against him. Maybe someone else can attest to it, has a different opinion or a similar opinion. But he said that Plesioth underwater really wasn't kind of that bad. And Plesioth is kind of interesting, as he's like the proto underwater monster, right? He meanders around in lakes outside of arenas. He travels via like underground rivers and whatnot, or above ground rivers, or across the ocean and whatnot. You can't go out in the water with him, but you can like fish him out with frogs and whatnot, which is kind of cool. If you're running a ranged weapon, you can kill him out in the water and his body won't wash ashore and you can't get your cars. Did anyone else do that? That made me really mad. But you can do it. The other thing is, I think Plesioth kind of looks good. I think Plesioth's a good-looking monster, especially in the more up-to-date renders when he's got like a nice sheen going. You want to play that up with some modern graphics and give him some like good like reflection off of his scales and whatnot, and just kind of play around with it. I think Plesioth's honestly kind of a good-looking monster. I really do. I legitimately do think for a giant fish wyvern, I think the colors are pretty good, like the orange and like the really nice dark blue. He's not like super duper cool, but he's like a very prototype like wyvern fish. And the Piscean wyverns just in general, I think could really do for some new stuff. But as like a prototype like wyvern evolved into a fish, I think he looks pretty great. Yeah, no, I think he's pretty flawed, right? Because mostly his moveset is still pretty basic because they never really went back and fixed it, and his hitboxes are just busted beyond belief. A couple of new moves and just some well-needed fixes, and you have something I think that's pretty good. It's still a little bit simple, but I think you have something that's kind of good. Yeah, no, I think a return to form for Plesioth could be kind of good. Green Plesioth now. I actually like Green Plesioth even a little bit more, right? Number one, I like the regular Plesioth design. I love the Green Plesioth design. I think the color choice for Green Plesioth is excellent. I love the green that they use. I love the little splashes of yellow and orange that they use. I love kind of like the purple that's woven into his wings. I think Green Plesioth looks excellent, honestly, as a monster. He's a little bit more aggressive, so he's up out of the water a little bit more, which it just fixes some of the issues of the normal Plesioth. Still has some of the broken elements, so, those would need to be fixed, so those are obviously going to hold him back. Again, underwater would be kind of cool. I think something you could do really cool with him is, so there's map overlap between the two of these. I think what you would really want to do, keep regular Plesioth as a desert fish, maybe with a little bit of overlap in between maps, and keep Green Plesioth as a jungle fish. And if you want to do lakes and rivers in the jungle and whatnot, I think you could do something really cool with kind of like a running river going through a map, and then you just have this massive Green Plesioth just under the water levels and whatnot, stalking freshwater lakes in jungles and rainforests and whatnot. I think you could have something kind of cool with Green Plesioth being such a big water predator in kind of a more closed in area bodies of water in a jungle environment. I think you can do something kind of cool with him. I think you can make Green Plesioth, just for his size and where he is and whatnot, you could make him a pretty intimidating creature. I think I'm going to bump you just above the raptors. Okay. Let's talk about another monster that I really like that a lot of people don't. I like Kirin. I'm going to tell you why I like Kirin. I like Kirin because Monster Hunter as a game franchise wants you to counter build, wants you to take up defensive skills. Once you have to understand, right? In this kind of age where a lot of people play super duper hardo and they want the biggest numbers and they want to play competitive and they want to play meta, and they're going on YouTube and looking up videos of what the best builds are and what the highest damage numbers are. It needs to be stated that that's not really what Monster Hunter is about. Monster Hunter wants you to work against the tools that the monster has. Now, you can be good enough at the games that you can brute force around them. You can know the tools of the trade well enough that you can get around them. You can brute force through them. Those are doable options. You are going to have a better time with certain monsters if you learn them, if you plan around them, and if you fight them on their terms. A lot of people don't do that, and I think that's why certain monsters are very unpopular. I think that's why Kirin's unpopular. I think that's why Almudron's unpopular. When I face down Kirin, I run Switch Axe. Especially I try to get as much sword gameplay out of the Switch Axe as I can, because the sword mode in Switch Axe auto Mind's Eye. So when Kirin goes into rage mode and hardens up all its scales and makes it so that it is reflects almost all weapons save for on his head, I can Mind's Eye through to get around him. Also, the attacks on the sword mode for Switch Axe are pretty like non-committal, right? It's very, very, you can roll out of just about every attack animation. It's not like Longsword where you're kind of locked up into combos and whatnot. Switch Axe, you can kind of like roll out of pretty much whatever you're doing. It's not a very high commitment weapon. So when his Thunderbolts are coming down, you can kind of get out pretty easily. So when I'm fighting Kirin, I'm running skills that will allow for more uptime on the sword. So stuff like Focus and Power Prolonger. I'm running Paralysis Negate, I'm running Switch Axe, try to get the most sword mode out of it, and in, like, World specifically, I'm running, like, the Thunder Mantles and stuff like that. And in doing that, I really like Kirin a lot. I think Kirin is a very cool dance. I think memorizing the head swing patterns it has to know what lightning bolts are coming down, you don't even sometimes like have to very consciously do it. You'll sometimes just kind of like internalize which head movements do what. That's really neat. Again, Kirin is a monster that incentivizes you to fight on its terms, which is something that Monster Hunter is absolutely positively about. Defensive skills are there for a reason. You really should be using them. If there is a monster you hate, I ask that you try and plan around it. It's not a 100% guarantee that that's going to help you like it, but that's why I think Kirin is actually legitimately well designed. I think Kirin exemplifies that aspect of Monster Hunter extremely well. The need to plan around gimmicks, the need to learn tells, the need to take defensive skills and prep for certain situations, because Kirin is very, very dangerous without certain precautions, and a very fun dance when you take them. So I love Kirin. I actually really, really like fighting Kirin. I think it looks amazing. I think it's super cool as a concept for an Elder Dragon. Like, the first generation Elder Dragons in of themselves are fascinating in that only one of them is like the conventional dragon. None of them use either of the very common, like, bulk used Elder Dragon skeletons, because those haven't been invented yet. And then you have Kirin, which just isn't a dragon. It's a unicorn. It's an equine. And that is establishes right off the bat that Elder Dragon really even kind of defies the conventional definition of a dragon, right? That Elder Dragons are animals beyond classification and categorization, and yet Kirin still, I think, has, remind me if I'm wrong, but I think Kirin still has Elder Dragon Bone and Elder Dragon Blood. I can look that up real quick. Okay, so yeah, you can get Elder Dragon Bones and Elder Dragon Blood out of them, at least in World, right? Seems like there's a little bit of conflict in there. So yeah, so he still has, like, some biological similarities to some of the conventional dragons, and it kind of introduces the idea of just how weird and bizarre and out there this classification is, which is really, really cool. That you have a very kind of like ecologically thought out game series in Monster Hunter, and then you have these outliers who will defy convention and will have powers that are much, much more difficult to explain. And Kirin, I think, is a big example of even how far that can get pushed and how different that can be. I like Kirin. I like Kirin a lot. Is Kirin an absolute classic or an old reliable? Do I like Kirin that much? Do I like Kirin better than Diablos and Gravios? Maybe like a hair more? Do I like him better than Black Gravios and Black Diablos? I don't think so. I think these guys are still a little bit more threatening, a little bit more fun. He's either the top of all reliable or the bottom of absolute classic. Let's try right there for now. Okay. Lao Shan Lung. Lao Shan Lung. I've talked about Lao. I'm rooting for Lao. I'd like to see Lao back again. I'd like to see Lao given some new things. I'd like to see Lao given like a nice proper kaiju treatment. Be a little bit more aggressive. Be a little bit bigger. Be a little bit more of a threat. As is, though, Lao ain't much. There's some neat stuff there the first 2-3 times you fight him. And then he loses the luster almost kind of immediately, right? What I do love about Lao is if you can find it, go looking for the live orchestra version of his theme. Because they have this like organ bit they add to it. This is another thing I talked about when I did his video. But he's got some legitimately cool music. And if they ever bring Lao back, they really should add that bit into his music properly. But it's got like a nice bit of like dread to it, and the organ's just a really beautiful instrument. I'm rooting for Lao. Lao's not great. When they brought Lao back in Generations, they probably for the time that they had to probably work on him, because again, that's kind of like a grab bag greatest hits game with a lot of reused assets. They updated the defenses that you had to interact him with, and that made his like actual encounter a little bit more interesting. Didn't make Lao more interesting. They didn't give him anything new to do. The design's fine. I think he looks okay. I think with a nice facelift, you could make Lao look really, really cool. I think it's like conceptually it's a good idea, but he looks a little goofy, little derpy. I say he's kind of flawed. He is kind of flawed. Better than Gypceros, I think. Right there. Ashen, I don't even know what you do with Ashen, really. What do you do with him? Because he doesn't have any element. He doesn't have any new attacks, because Lao Shan Lung barely has attacks to begin with. I don't know. He doesn't look as good. I think like the red-brown looks better than the gray. Like the very, very washed out gray. I don't know. Like, I have absolutely no need to see Ashen Lao Shan Lung again. Half the time I barely remember he exists. I doubt Capcom remembers he exists. Like, I don't know. Like, what? I don't even know what the point of him is. He's never come back. The color design isn't bad, but it's not as good. I don't know. Like, what would you do with him? I guess you could retroactively give him an element, but, like, where was it the first time he had it? I don't know. I guess it depends, like, if you ever bring Lao back and you have him do new stuff and, like, actually fight. I guess that's more of a template that you could elaborate on for an Ashen Lao Shan Lung, but, like, I don't know. Yeah, no, I think you need to fix Lao first before you can really start working on Ashen. He needs to have more of a structure for him to build on. So for now, as things are, I think you can leave Ashen Lao Shan Lung in the past. And there's just, out of like these three guys, there's the least to work with. All right, let's not pretend. Okay. Fatalis. One of the coolest bosses out there, right? In a world full of goofy monsters and gimmicky monsters and wacky biological evolutions, even amongst the Elder Dragons, the weird and the inexplicable and the goofy and the wacky and the somewhat explainable, you have the pure European black-scaled, fire-breathing, kingdom-destroying dragon of dragons. Minus, like, the goofy, like, long tongue. There's nothing silly about him. There's no cool, like, development in him. There's no wacky bit of his biology. He is fire and death. He is attributed to what we currently know as probably the single greatest cataclysm in Monster Hunter's history, at least, like, canonically. There's stuff that's in, like, art books and whatnot that we don't know if it actually happened in real worlds, but, like, the destruction of Shrade we know for a fact is the thing that happened. Though a very simple dragon, very well executed, and just with, like, the updated render, he looks tremendous. It's still simple, certainly, but simple isn't bad, right? And simple is the point of Fatalis. Fatalis is something straight out of, like, our actual mythology. He is the dragon, the nightmare, the hunter, the mythological beast. Whereas all of these other animals and creatures were created for Monster Hunter and were, like, extrapolated from animals and from mythological creatures from, like, our real world and our real culture. Fatalis is the dragon of human mythology. You know, he is just this absolute apex of fear and terror. And there's a really cool theory that dragons manifested in a lot of cultures due to the fact that, dragons appeared in a lot of cultures that had no communication with one another. And the theory goes that, like, dragons were comprised of a lot of elements that early humans feared. Fire and flight and razor-sharp talons and tough scales of creatures and massive fangs. Compilations of several different creatures that and elements that human beings feared manifested themselves into, like, kind of this, like, colloquial fear, which is a neat theory, honestly. Who knows if there's any actual backing to it factually, but I've always kind of thought it was a really cool notion. And Fatalis very much represents that. And for that reason, the simple dragon design is perfect for him. And then, so you have that concept, right? And I think that concept is perfect. It is such a fantastic outlier for Monster Hunter, of being so simple and so kind of, like, expected for our culture that it is terrifying within the culture of this universe, even beyond the other elders. But for a good long while, he was very boring. He was very plain. His theme was just kind of a remix of the Forest and Hills. His moveset wasn't particularly flashy. It was high damage. He did a lot of damage, but he didn't live up to the legend until Iceborne, and we've all fought him in Iceborne, and we know how good that fight is. It's one of the best boss fights that I think gaming has to offer, is that Fatalis fight in Iceborne. It's legendary, it's monumental, it's immaculate, it's amazing. He looks amazing. His sound design, his phases, his horn breaks, his gear, the build up to him, and, like, some of the confirmations. Like, they don't go too heavy into confirming some of the myths about him, but they go into, like, natural disasters popping up in the world before his arrival. They go into animals fleeing in fear. Like, even creatures that, like, physically pound for pound should be able to be stronger than him, just understand that there's something wrong here. You know, whether or not he actually is a supernatural creature by this universe's rules, which I'm fine with one way or the other, honestly. Fatalis is a creature I definitely want to talk about way more. I'd be cool if he was supernatural. I'd be cool if he's not. If he's just, like, but the games and the world seem to kind of be wishy-washy about it on purpose. They don't want to give us a straight answer, and I'm perfectly fine with not getting a straight answer. If we never do, I'm okay with that, honestly. And I know some people will kind of be very kind of, like, fact lawyery about him. It's like, oh, well, this has never been stated for absolute fact, and he's just a dragon, blah, 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 blah. And and maybe that might be true from what facts we actually know, but I think people who kind of fact lawyer about Fatalis kind of miss the point of the character, of the creature, in that, like, it's cool that we as real people kind of subscribe and are infatuated with these myths about him, because that, like, kind of feeds back into being culture about Monster Hunter, is like we're kind of not sure about these myths and legends that they're not sure about, right? You know, as far as we know and as far as they know, we're kind of in the dark about what he is, because we've never seen populations about him. We've never seen him. I think there's a little bit of in what, like the Iceborne lore book about him like eating Lao or hunting Lao for food. I think there was a little bit about them, but like we've never seen them migrate. We've never seen them mate. We've never seen them interact with one another. We've never seen them like, I don't know if we've ever really seen them eat all that much. We don't see them poop. It's just like this thing that shows up when the apocalypse happens. That destroyed a kingdom hundreds of years ago. Are all these things about him true? They might be, they might not. And honestly, I'm fine either way, and I'm fine not knowing. I think that the mythology around him in terms of in-game and in-lore is really, really, really fun. I think that makes the Monster Hunter world feel a little bit more alive, and I think that's been really cool for discussions within our own community about him. I love him for that fact. And then, the fight is just one of the best. It's just one of the best. It's very simple. It's very brutal. You have to work at it. You have to practice at it. You have to build for it. It's just good difficulty. It's really, really good difficulty. The apex of being the absolute climax of what is probably going to be Monster Hunter's most important game in its series history. It's super fitting that it was Fatalis. It was executed beautifully. I love everything about him. Everything about him. He's so phenomenal. Supernatural demon or just super rare dragon. Whichever way you want to go. Alright, and we cap this off with one of his brothers, the Crimson Fatalis. With Crimson Fatalis, so there's been a couple of different versions of him over the years. Up until Iceborne, Crimson was probably the best of the Fatalis. Mostly because of his 4U version, right? Because his 4U version did some cool stuff. It has just more fiery abilities. It implemented blast powder. It has his meteor shower, and then it had like his conjurable heat waves that he could like summon up out of the lava. Like there's a lot of cool stuff that Crimson Fatalis can do in 4U. And then you have like the Frontier version of Crimson Fatalis that has the really good arena. One of the best themes in Monster Hunter. Has a couple of cool new moves, but not like the craziest stuff ever. And then my mind also wanders to like the Crimson Fatalis Resurgence mod, which isn't official, but I mean, hey, if they wanted to pick off of that, why not? Sure. There is the makings for Crimson Fatalis of like one of the best of all time, maybe even something that trumps the original Fatalis. He's not there yet. I think the best thing if Crimson Fatalis ever comes back is to kind of just like piece a little bit from his different versions together and just give him just a little bit of an extra bump. And you have something that's exemplary. As of right now, I think you have something that's quite good. I think in 4U, he was definitely able to bypass some of the like slow monotonousness of the original Fatalis. And even kind of like White Fatalis is still not like the craziest thing ever, though he's still pretty good. And then for some reason they took those changes away in Generations and Generations Ultimate, which I think was definitely a mistake. So I think 4U is definitely like the best mainline version, and the 4U one is good. And then you have some more to cherry pick from, including like Iceborne Fatalis, Frontier Fatalis, or Frontier Crimson Fatalis, and if they wanted to, Resurgence Crimson Fatalis. And then you have something that's absolutely exemplary. As is right now, your like super critical, super heated Crimson is definitely his best mainline version, and it's quite good. I think I might put him like right here, just right over the two black monsters. Yeah. That was poorly phrased. All right, let's do a little bit of corrections. So leave him in the past. So we have Ashen Lao Shan Lung at the bottom, Purple Gypceros, and Cephadrome. I'm fine with this order, I think. This I see like very, very little unless this gets made better. Purple Gypceros, I just really like, he's very whatever to me. I think I might actually swap these two. I'd be a little bit more interested in purple Gypceros over Cephadrome. So I think, again, just like, I think you're just replaced. Plesioth does what you do better, and Beatotus does what you do better. Like, I don't see really a lot of room for Cephadrome to come back anymore. Alright, does Gendrome stay this low? Gendrome over blue Kut Ku. I'll put him... I do like the design. Like, this render's kind of nice for him. I do like the design. I do like seeing him around. And blue Kut Ku, again, I don't have super duper strong feelings on. Gendrome over Gypceros. I think Gypceros is just a little bit more interesting in the amount of stuff that he can do. He's still definitely very flawed, though. I think his design needs a nice facelift. I think his abilities need to be able to work together in tandem with each other a little bit more, to make him a little bit more dangerous and a little less obnoxious. Do I like him more than Lao? Yeah, I like him a little bit more than Lao, honestly. And I'm going to bump Gendrome over Lao. Gendrome over Lao. Nah, Lao... super duper boring. Just kind of frustrating. I'll bump you up one. Azure over Gypceros. Yeah, that's for sure. He needs help. Azure over Khezu. Khezu got a nice bump and rise and a nice, like, detail bit to, yeah, I'm fine with that. Plesioth over Khezu. I'm fine with that. Iodrome this high. I think Iodrome's going to get bumped. I don't... Do I like him more than Plesioth? Do I like him more than Khezu? Do I like him more than Azure? Do I like him more than Gypceros? Maybe like right there. Yeah, Iodrome is a little high. I don't think I like him better than these three. It's not even that he's like super duper flawed. It's just like, I don't know, there's a bunch of health. I don't love poison. His moveset isn't super engaging. If you made your moveset more engaging, I think that would warrant him having the health pool that he has. As is, it's just like a whole bunch of like leaping and poison spit that you're just punching for like 6-7 minutes. It feels like it just goes on too long. Velocidrome. I like him more than Plesioth. I think he's good, being bumped up into perfectly fine. Do I like him more than green Plesioth? Maybe like, no. Green Plesioth over pink Rathian. I think the design's better. This one fights a little bit better just because this guy's so kind of busted up. I think that's fine. I think there's some potential here. Basarios over pink Rathian. That's fine. Yeah, that's... Basarios over pink Rathian. Yes. Yeah, no, I'm fine with that. Kut Ku over Basarios for sure. Monoblos over Kut Ku for sure. Bump up one tier. Am I fine with this being in perfectly fine? Yeah, no, I think my reasoning is solid. I think if it was a 5th gen Monoblos, it'd be an old reliable. But as is, it still had, just from his last incarnation, still has some of the more obnoxious way that the old Blos is fought. There's potential for him to be way up here. I think for now, as much as I do like him, yeah, no. Actually, you know what? I'm going to put you up here. Because I do really like Monoblos, especially design-wise. White Monoblos is good to be a shred ahead of that. I like the Bull Charge. I like the white. Red Khezu over the Monobloses. I'm going to bump you back just a little bit. Rathian over the Monobloses, sure. A little bit more fleshed out. Gravios over Rathian, sure. Diablos over Gravios, sure. Kirin over Diablos, sure. Do I keep Kirin down here? I was a little bit iffy about that. So I put Kirin in an absolute classic, because part of me kind of thinks he deserves it. You know what? I'll have that take. Sure, I'll have that take. Someone will get mad at me. That's all right. People are going to get mad at me for a couple of these. Black Gravios. Yeah, nice and spooky and powerful and terrifying. A little bit better than Kirin. And then Black Diablos is a little bit better than that. Crimson over those. Crimson over Fatalis. Or Crimson Fatalis over Rathalos. Yeah, Rathalos has the better. Rathalos and Garuga. Ooh, that's interesting. I really like them both. For very similar reasons. Rathalos over Garuga. Yes. Especially the modern one. And then gold and silver are in a good thing. Definitely a little bit better than the regular one. And then Fatalis at the absolute top. So there's some really good stuff, right? There's a couple of monsters that's got some really good facelifts in the more modern generations. Fatalis and the Metal Wraths and the regular Rathalos and Garuga all got really good versions. Black Diablos is nice and tough and Iceborne. I think Kirin is really well designed if you want to target it correctly. Black Gravios is nice and spooky. Crimson Fatalis needs a little bit more to be really good, but I think he's definitely up there. A lot of these ones are just like really good monsters that could use just like a little bit of sprucing up. These guys definitely have some potential. I think they are due for just like a little bit of extra stuff. These guys just have some pretty major issues. I think like you need some hitbox fixes and a little bit of extra moves. You just have a superior monster. You don't have music. I think your body shape is definitely kind of flawed. You need to get facelifted up to the modern generations. You're very simple and you live too long. Yeah. And then, like, these three, perfectly fine if I never see him again. Okay. I'm pretty happy with this. And, wow. So this was like half the size, less than half the size of the 5th generation monsters in terms of monsters, and the video is almost going to be as long. This is probably going to be edited down a little bit, but I'm looking at 2 hours, 48 minutes right here. So I talked for a good long while. This is one I'm going to be very, very interested in your comments when you guys get back to me in the section here. Because I know there's a lot of first-generation monsters that a lot of people really don't like. I think Garuga and Kirin being so far up is definitely going to ruffle a couple of people. I mean, Rathalos, too. I get a couple of comments of people who hate Rathalos, and that sucks to be you. But, yeah, no. I hope there's a couple of surprises up here for you. Because there was a couple of surprises for me when I really looked at stuff and really tried to evaluate it. But yeah, no. I think the first generation of Monster Hunter, it's gotten some love for sure. There's a lot of entries here who I think have just really kind of hit their potential. There's really not too much more that they need. Just like maybe a touch up here or there is perfectly fine. There's a lot of guys in here who I think definitely do need a little bit of help, do need some touch-ups, do need a bit of a resurgence, and a couple that I think were really just ill-conceived from the get-go. Thankfully, not too many, though. Not as many as I kind of anticipated. I think the first generation has a little bit more merit than I was originally anticipating. I think there's a lot of good stuff here. There's a lot of good ideas here. This is Monster Hunter at its earliest, at kind of like its purest, at like just kind of like burgeoning ideas and really just starting to touch the possibilities of what this franchise can do. Definitely a lot more gimmick-oriented than we are now. I mean, in some places. Some monsters do some very, very interesting and very creative stuff. But these guys were really built even more for defensive skills and for item usage than 5th generation stuff. And that leads to some stuff that people don't like. And some of it, I think, is due to actually poor design. And some of it I find to be due to people who just don't learn the opponent that they're fighting and just kind of go in with their favorite thing and then get their butt kicked and decide that monsters are poorly designed even when they aren't. And I'll stand by that mentality. I think there's monsters who get hated for the wrong reasons. Some of these guys have been given a lot of really good stuff to do. And a lot of these guys just always had really, really fun ideas. And I'm excited to see what Wilds brings along, right? I'd like to see Wilds take some notes from the more classic games and kind of just make defensive skills a little bit more interesting and a little bit more necessary, kind of like backtrack on the crit attack meta that we've had. I'm really happy that the Slinger is coming back, because I think the Slinger was a really, really great tool for item implementation, especially with like the faster speed that we have now. I think it was a really good way to kind of keep the usage of items kind of matched up with the speed of the actual combat. So I'd love to see more monsters that really kind of you want to be using items against them. And I think that's what this generation did really, really well. That's what these monsters did really, really well. Yeah, no, I think there's still lessons that these guys can teach about design, even in their jankiest, brokeniest, oldest incarnations. This was a lot of fun to do. This was a lot of fun to look at like the first generation. Yeah, so doing a couple of unscripted videos in this early part of January has given me a little bit of time to really kind of like reassert the schedule for the videos that I'm going to be tackling in this early chunk of 2024. I'm not going to announce anything just yet, but yeah, the schedule's being worked on. It's being kind of formulated. The idea gears are shifting. So yeah, a little bit of a lighter, easier project right here, leading into some more proper essay work and some more proper editing work and stuff like that. And we're going to have a fun time. But I think you guys are going to really like this one. I think people responded to that first tier list video very, very well. And I'm looking forward to the feedback on this one, because I think I definitely have some takes that are going to catch people off guard. But until then, and until the next video, this has been CR-Volcanic, or Connor. Happy to have ya. I'll see you around. Shout out to all the patrons, and special shout out to Nihilus Chimerax, Datboy Doindading, and Pico Plush. Thanks a lot, guys.